The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Tonto as Marshal Curly Wilcox pushed through the doors of the Bucket of Blood saloon, his weathered hand resting on the worn grip of his Colt. The marshal's steel-gray eyes scanned the dim interior, looking for Buck Rickabaugh, the stagecoach driver who'd be taking the run to Lordsburg. What he found instead made his jaw tighten. "Marshal, I'm looking for my shotgun guard," Buck called out from the far end of the bar, his round face creased with concern beneath his battered hat. "Is he here?" "Out with the posse, Buck," Curly replied, moving closer and lowering his voice. "Trying to catch the Ringo kid." Buck's eyes widened. "Ringo? I thought Ringo was in the pen." "He was." Curly's expression remained grim. "Busted out." A slow grin spread across Buck's weathered face. "Well, good for him. My guess, the kid's aiming to get even with them plumber boys. It was their testimony sent him to the penitentiary." Curly leaned against the bar, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Well, all I gotta say is that he'd better stay away from that there Luke Plummer. Why gosh, Luke's run all of Ringo's friends out of Lordsburg. The last trip there, I seen him hit a rancher on the head with the barrel of his gun, and he just laid it wide open like a butchered steer." "You seen Luke Plummer in Lordsburg?" Buck's jovial expression faded. "Yes, sirree." Curly straightened, his decision made. "You boys take care of the office for a couple days. I'm going to Lordsburg with Buck. Gonna ride shotgun." Buck winced. "Oh, gosh, if I could learn to keep my big mouth shut." Across town, in the sterile confines of the Tonto Bank, Henry Gatewood accepted a leather satchel from his clerk with the self-satisfied air of a man who believed the world operated according to his personal philosophy. His fingers drummed impatiently on the polished mahogany desk as he counted the contents. "Here's the payroll, Mr. Gatewood," the clerk announced. $50,000. Gatewood's thin lips curved into a smile. "Ever since I opened this bank, I've been trying to tell those people to deposit their payroll 6 months in advance. It's good, sound business." "Good business for you, Mr. Gatewood," the clerk observed dryly. "Well, there's your receipt," Gatewood said, waving the document dismissively. "And remember this, what's good for the banks is good for the country." He tucked the satchel under his arm, already calculating the uses for such a sum once he reached Lordsburg. His wife would never think to look for him there, not right away. By the time she discovered his absence, he'd be long gone, perhaps to San Francisco, or even farther. Meanwhile, in the shabby boarding house on the edge of town, a very different drama was unfolding. Dallas, a woman whose beauty was matched only by the hardness life had beaten into her green eyes, stood defiantly in the doorway as the landlady brandished a broom like a weapon. "Get out and stay out!" the landlady shrieked, her face purple with righteous indignation. "I'm keeping your trunk 'cause you ain't paid your rent." On the street below, Doc Josiah Boone observed the scene with the philosophical detachment of a man who'd lost everything worth losing years ago. He raised a battered silver flask in salute, his cultured voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Is this the face that wrecked 1,000 ships and burned the towerless tops of Ilium?" he quoted, his words slightly slurred. "Farewell, fair Helen." Dallas descended the steps with as much dignity as she could muster, her worn carpetbag clutched in one hand. She found Doc waiting at the bottom, swaying slightly but steady enough to offer his arm. "Doc," she said, her voice catching, "can they make me leave town when I don't want to go? Do I have to go?" Doc's roomy eyes softened with genuine sympathy. "Now, Dallas, don't you go making no fuss." "Do I have to go, Doc, just because they say so?" He sighed, the sound of a man who'd made peace with the world's injustices long ago. "Now, Dallas, I've got my orders. Don't blame these ladies. It ain't them." "It is them!" Dallas's voice rose with barely suppressed fury. "Doc, haven't I any right to live? What have I done?" Doc placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We're the victims of a foul disease called social prejudice, my child. These dear ladies of the Law and Order League are scouring out the dregs of the town. Come on, be a proud, glorified dreg like me." A deputy approached, his young face uncomfortable with the task. "You get going, Doc. You're drunk." "Just two of a kind," Doc announced grandly, offering Dallas his arm with exaggerated courtesy. "Take my arm, Madame la Comtesse. The tumbril awaits. To the guillotine." Inside Jerry's general store, Samuel Peacock, A nervous little man in an ill-fitting suit arranged his sample cases of whiskey with meticulous care. He was a whiskey drummer from Kansas City, Kansas, and he took great pride in the distinction between his Kansas and the Missouri city that shared the name. When the rough-looking man in black approached the counter, Peacock instinctively took a step back. "If you ever go east, brother," Doc Boone was saying to anyone who would listen, "come out to our house for dinner. No one in all Kansas City, Kansas, sets a better table than my dear wife Violet." "Jerry," Doc addressed the storekeeper with the gravity of a man requesting his last meal, "I'll admit, as one man to another, that economically I haven't been of much value to you. But suppose you could put one on credit." Jerry shook his head. "If talk was money, Doc, you'd be the best customer I got." "I'm leaving town, Jerry," Doc said quietly, and for a moment the mask of jovial drunkenness slipped, revealing something raw and broken beneath. "Honest, and I thought you might, out of memory of our many happy—" "All right, Doc," Jerry relented, unable to meet the other man's eyes. "Just this one." "Thank you, Jerry." Doc raised the glass, his hand surprisingly steady. "Here's a man going on the stagecoach with you. He's an Easterner from Kansas City, Missouri." "Kansas City, Kansas, brother," Peacock corrected automatically, then flinched as Doc turned to face him. "To your health, Reverend," Doc said, downing the whiskey in one practiced motion. Peacock cleared his throat nervously. "I'm not a clergyman. My name is Peacock. He's a whiskey drummer," Jerry supplied. Doc's eyes lit up with predatory interest. "Well, well, how are you, Mr. Haycock?" "Peacock." "Don't tell me, sir. I know. A familiar name and an honored name. I never forget a face or a friend." Doc's attention focused on the sample cases with laser intensity. "Samples? Ah, rye." Outside, Buck was bringing his team of horses around to the front of the depot, calling out their names with the affection of a man who loved his animals more than most people. "Well, Brownie, Blackie, Belle, Bess, get up." The stagecoach that would carry them all to Lordsburg, or to their deaths, stood waiting in the afternoon sun, its red paint faded and its leather straps worn soft with use. It was a Concord coach, built to last but showing the hard miles of desert travel. Inside, it could hold 9 passengers in reasonable discomfort, or a dozen in misery. At the Whitney residence on the better side of town, Lucy Mallory sat in the parlor with Nancy Whitney, accepting a cup of coffee with hands that trembled slightly. Lucy was perhaps 25, with the kind of refined beauty that spoke of old Virginia families and cotillion balls, but her face was drawn with exhaustion and something more, a feverish determination that bordered on recklessness. "Oh, I'm so glad to see you, Lucy," Nancy fussed, pouring the coffee with maternal concern. "Sit down, darling. We'll have a cup of coffee. You must be tired from that long trip." Lucy's eyes had fixed on a man entering the hotel across the street, a tall figure in a black coat and broad-brimmed hat, moving with the controlled grace of a predator. "Who is that gentleman?" Lucy asked. Nancy's lips pursed with disapproval. "Hardly a gentleman, Mrs. Mallory." "I should think not. He's a notorious gambler." The man in question was Hatfield, though whether that was his first name, last name, or merely the name he'd chosen to wear in this territory, no one could say for certain. He moved through the world like a man who'd once been something better and couldn't quite forget it, his manners too refined for his current profession, his drawl too cultured for a simple card sharp. In the hotel saloon, Hatfield had just raised his bet when the other players folded with disgusted mutters. They knew better than to push their luck against a man whose long fingers could make cards do whatever he wished. "I raise, gentlemen," Hatfield said quietly, gathering his winnings without triumph or apology. Outside, the depot was beginning to bustle with activity. Marshal Curley checked his weapons for the 3rd time, his experienced eye noting every detail of the preparations. Buck was still fussing with his team, adjusting harnesses and checking hooves with the thoroughness of a man who knew that small oversights could be fatal in Apache country. "All aboard for Dry Fork, Apache Wells, Lee's Ferry, and Lordsburg," Buck's voice rang out across the dusty plaza. Doc helped Dallas with her bag, his gallantry undiminished by the whiskey coursing through his system. "I'll take that, Dallas." "Oh, thanks," she murmured, allowing herself to be handed into the coach. "In you go, Dallas, and a pleasant voyage," Doc said, following her inside with somewhat less grace. Peacock climbed aboard next, his sample cases clutched protectively to his chest. He settled into the forward-facing seat with visible relief, grateful to have survived the encounter with Doc Boone's thirst. Then Lucy Mallory appeared in the depot entrance and Nancy Whitney's voice rose in protest. "Mrs. Whitney, you're not going to let your friend travel with that creature." "She's right, Lucy," another woman chimed in. "And besides, you're not well enough to travel." Lucy's chin lifted with the stubborn pride of her Virginia upbringing. "It's only a few hours, Nancy. I'm quite all right." "But you shouldn't travel a step without a doctor," Nancy insisted. "There is a doctor, dear," Lucy replied coolly. "The driver told me." Nancy's face blanched. "Doctor? Doc Boone? Why, he couldn't doctor a horse." "Lucy, darling, you must be very careful. Take good care of yourself." Despite the protests, Lucy allowed herself to be helped into the coach. She took the seat opposite Dallas, her back ramrod straight, her eyes fixed on some distant point that only she could see. If she noticed the other woman's presence, she gave no sign. Buck climbed into the driver's box, gathering the reins with practiced ease. "Lady folks ride facing forward, please." Curly was about to swing up beside him when the sound of approaching horses made everyone freeze. A cavalry detachment came trotting into the plaza, led by Lieutenant Blanchard, whose young face bore the anxious expression of a man carrying bad news. "Captain Sickles asks if you'll deliver this dispatch in Lordsburg the moment you arrive," the lieutenant said, handing a sealed envelope to Curly. "The telegraph line has been cut." "Sure," Curly replied, tucking the dispatch into his vest. "We're going with you as far as the noon station at Dry Fork." The lieutenant's jaw tightened. "There'll be a troop of cavalry there, and they'll take you on to Apache Wells. From Apache Wells, you'll have another escort of soldiers into Lordsburg, but you must warn your passengers that they travel at their own risk." "At their own risk?" Gatewood emerged from the shadows, his banker's mind already calculating the implications. "What's the trouble, Lieutenant?" "Geronimo." The single word fell like a stone into still water, and the ripples of fear spread outward through the assembled crowd. "Geronimo?" Buck's voice rose to a near squeak. "Well, then I ain't go—" "Will you sit down?" Curly snapped, hauling the driver back into his seat before he could bolt. The lieutenant continued, his voice flat and official. "Of course, the Army has no authority over you gentlemen. If you think it's unsafe to make the trip, this stage is going to Lordsburg," Curly interrupted. "If you think it ain't safe to ride along with us, I figure we can get there without you soldier boys." The lieutenant's face flushed. "I have my orders, sir, and I always obey orders." Buck whimpered audibly, earning a sharp elbow from Curly. The marshal stood and addressed the passengers, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Did you all hear what the lieutenant said?" A chorus of murmured assents came from inside the coach. "Well, me and Buck are taking this coach through, passengers or not. Whoever wants to get out can get out." Silence greeted this announcement. Then Doc Boone's voice drifted out, thick with whiskey and amusement. "Courage! Courage, Reverend!" "Ladies first," Peacock stammered. "Oh, excuse me." Curly leaned into the doorway, fixing Dallas with a level stare. "How about you, Dallas? What are you trying to do, scare somebody?" Dallas's eyes flashed with defiance. "They got me in here. Now let them try to put me out. There are worse things than Apaches." Lucy Mallory spoke next, her voice quiet but utterly determined. "If you'll take my advice, ma'am, you won't take this trip." Dallas started to respond, but Lucy continued. "My husband is with his troops in Dry Fork. If he's in danger, I want to be with him." Peacock cleared his throat nervously. "You see, brother, I have a wife and 5 children in Kansas City." Doc clapped him on the shoulder with drunken enthusiasm. "Then you're a man. By all the powers that be, Reverend, you're a man." "All right, folks," Curly said, preparing to close the door. "Marshal?" Hatfield's voice cut through the commotion. He stood in the doorway of the hotel, his long coat brushing the tops of his polished boots. "Make room for one more. I'm offering my protection to this lady." His eyes met Lucy's for a brief moment. "I can shoot fairly straight if there's need for it." Curly's expression hardened. "That's been proved too many times, Hatfield." "All right, get in. We're late." The marshal's tone made it clear that this particular passenger was on sufferance. Hatfield climbed aboard, settling into the remaining seat with fluid grace. "May I trouble you to move over, sir?" "Oh, yes, yes, of course," Peacock squeaked, pressing himself against the side of the coach. "Close the door," Curly ordered. "Get going, Buck." Buck was about to release the brake when a shout made him pull up short. "Whoa! Whoa!" Gatewood came running across the plaza, his expensive coat flapping, the leather satchel bouncing against his hip. "Room for another passenger?" "Sure is, Mr. Gatewood," Buck called back, relieved to have one more moment before plunging into the wilderness. "Going to Lordsburg?" "That's right. Just got a telegram. Had to stop to pack this bag." Curly's eyes narrowed as he watched the banker climb aboard, but he said nothing. The pieces were falling into place now. The cut telegraph line, Gatewood's sudden urgency, the heavy satchel that clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold coin. "Yeah, yeah, Sassy, Blackie, Brownie, Bill, yow!" Buck's voice rose in the particular sing-song that teamsters used when starting a long journey. The coach lurched forward, wheels creaking, leather straps groaning under the weight of 9 passengers and their baggage. Behind them, the cavalry detachment fell into formation, the soldiers' faces grim beneath their campaign hats. Inside the coach, an uncomfortable silence settled over the passengers. Lucy Mallory kept her gaze fixed out the window, her gloved hands folded primly in her lap. Dallas stared at the floor, acutely aware of the gulf between herself and the officer's wife sitting across from her. Gatewood clutched his satchel like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. Peacock tried to make himself as small as possible between Doc and Hatfield, and Doc himself had already retrieved a flask from somewhere inside his voluminous coat. Outside, Buck kept up a running commentary with his horses and with Curly, who sat beside him scanning the horizon with experienced eyes. "If there's anything I don't like, it's driving a stagecoach through Apache country," Buck muttered. "Funny catching Gatewood outside of town that way," Curly observed. "I just took this job 10 years ago so I could make enough money to marry my Mexican girl Julieta, and I've been working hard at it ever since. Bonnie, get over there, ho!" "Marriage?" Curly's tone suggested he thought the institution overrated. "Well, certainly. My wife's got more relatives than anyone you ever did see. I bet I'm feeding half the state of Chihuahua." "Sweetheart, ho! That seemed funny to you about Gatewood?" "Yeah." Curly's hand rested on the Winchester across his knees. "And then what do I get to eat when I get home in Lordsburg? Nothing but frijoles beans. That's all. Nothing but beans, beans, beans. Bessie, Brownie, Blackie girl, yow, get along." The miles rolled by under the creaking wheels. The sun climbed higher, turning the inside of the coach into an oven. Lucy's face grew paler, beads of perspiration forming on her forehead despite the relative coolness of the morning. Dallas noticed but said nothing, knowing her concern would not be welcome. Inside the coach, Doc was entertaining himself by tormenting Peacock. "Excuse me, ladies," he said with exaggerated politeness, extracting his flask yet again. "Close quarters." He sighed contentedly. "Warm today." Gatewood glared at him. "Your wife made it warm for me, Gatewood. She was chairman of our farewell committee." Dallas couldn't suppress a small smile at this, earning a sharp look from Lucy. Doc cleared his throat and launched into a new topic. "Fine-looking bunch of soldier boys back there. Always gives me great pride in my country when I see such fine young men in the U.S. Army. Anybody know where they're going?" Peacock stirred uncomfortably. "Brother, aren't you aware of what's happened?" Gatewood looked up from his satchel. "Happened? I don't follow you, Reverend." "I'm not a clergyman. My friend's a whiskey drummer," Doc supplied helpfully. "We're all going to be scalped, Gatewood, massacred in one fell swoop. That's why the soldiers are with us." Gatewood's face went pale. "He's joking, of course." "Oh, no, he's not," Peacock said miserably. "Oh, dear, no, I wish he were. It's that old Apache butcher, Geronimo. He's jumped the reservation. He's on the warpath." "Geronimo?" Gatewood's voice rose. "Why weren't the passengers notified? Why wasn't I told?" "We were told, Gatewood," Doc said cheerfully. "Yes. Weren't you told when you got that message from Lordsburg?" Gatewood cleared his throat, cleared his, "Oh, yes, of course. I forgot." Outside, Buck was still maintaining his monologue to the horses and anyone else who would listen. Steady now, string out, sweetheart. Now doggone it, they're bringing up her grandfather all the way from Mexico to live with us. Curly glanced over. I can't figure out how he got that message. Who? Her grandfather? No, Gatewood. Said he got a message. Telegraph line ain't workin'. Before Buck could respond, a gunshot cracked across the desert air. Hold it, Curly commanded, bringing the Winchester up to his shoulder. The horses plunged to a stop, harnesses jangling. In the middle of the road stood a young man in worn range clothes, a saddle over his shoulder and a rifle cradled in his arm. He couldn't have been more than 23, with the kind of open, honest face that made mothers trust him and fathers offer him work. But Curly knew that face, knew the name that went with it. Hey, look, it's Ringo, Buck breathed. Yeah. The young man raised his free hand in greeting. Hello, kid. Hello, Curly. Ringo's eyes moved to Buck with genuine warmth. Hiya, Buck. How's your folks? Oh, just fine, Ringo, except my grandfather came up. Shut up, Curly interrupted, never taking his eyes off the escaped prisoner. Ringo's smile never wavered. Didn't expect to see you riding shotgun on this run, Marshal? Going to Lordsburg? I figured you'd be there by this time. No, lame horse. Ringo gestured to the saddle on his shoulder. Well, it looks like you've got another passenger. Yeah, Curly's voice was flat. I'll take the Winchester. Ringo's expression grew serious. You may need me in this Winchester, Curly. Saw a ranch house burning last night. You don't understand, kid. You're under arrest. For a moment, something flashed in Ringo's blue eyes. Anger, frustration, resignation. But he handed over the rifle without protest. The cavalry lieutenant rode forward, his hand on his sidearm. Everything all right, Marshal? Everything's all right, Lieutenant. Curly took the Winchester and gestured to the coach with his head. Hope I ain't crowding you folks none. The more the merrier, Doc called out cheerfully from inside. Ringo climbed in, his presence seeming to fill the cramped space. He found himself squeezed between Dallas and Gatewood, directly across from Hatfield and Lucy Mallory. For the first time, he got a good look at Dallas, and something in his expression softened. Bonnie, Brownie, Blackie. Yeah, Bessie. The coach lurched back into motion, the rhythm of the wheels creating a hypnotic percussion against the hard-packed road. Ain't Ringo a fine boy? Buck said to Curly, his voice pitched low. I think so. You're just smarter than a trade rat. You knew all the time he was going to Lordsburg. Hey, reckon what he meant he saw ranch houses burning. Apaches. Oh, Apaches. Inside the coach, Hatfield was studying the new passenger with the detached interest of a professional gambler assessing a new player at the table. So, you're the notorious Ringo Kid. Ringo's mouth quirked in a half-smile. My friends just call me Ringo. Nickname I had as a kid. Right name's Henry. Doc leaned forward, squinting at the young man's face. Seems to me I knew your family, Henry. Didn't I fix your arm once when you were, bucked off a horse? Are you Doc Boone? Recognition lit Ringo's face. I certainly am. Now, let's see. I'd just been honorably discharged from the Union Army after the War of the Rebellion. Hatfield's drawl took on a harder edge. You mean the war for the Southern Confederacy, sir? I mean nothing of the kind, sir. Ringo intervened before the argument could escalate. That was my kid brother broke his arm. You did a good job, Doc, even if you was drunk. Thank you, son. Professional compliments are always pleasing. Yes, they are. Doc settled back with satisfaction. What happened to that boy whose arm I fixed? Ringo's expression went flat, his eyes distant. He was murdered. The word hung in the air like gun smoke. No one spoke. The only sounds were the creaking of the coach, the jangle of harness, and Buck's endless stream of encouragement to his horses. Dallas found herself studying Ringo's profile, the clean line of his jaw, the way his hands rested easy on his knees despite the handcuffs that circled his wrists. There was something about him that was different from the other men she'd known, a fundamental decency that poverty and prison hadn't managed to corrupt. The sun climbed toward noon, and the heat inside the coach became oppressive. Gatewood produced a cigar, lighting it with the self-importance of a man who believed his own comfort paramount. Hatfield's voice cut through the smoke. Put out that cigar. You're annoying this lady." Gatewood turned, his face flushing.
"Excuse me, madam. Being so partial to the weed myself, I sometimes forget that it disagrees with others. A gentleman doesn't smoke in the presence of a lady," Hatfield observed coldly. Doc stirred, his voice taking on an edge despite the whiskey. "3 weeks ago, I took a bullet out of a man who was shot by a gentleman. The bullet was in his back." Hatfield's hand moved toward his coat. "Do you mean to insinuate—" "Sit down, mister," Ringo said quietly. "Doc don't mean no harm." The tension subsided, but the atmosphere in the coach remained charged. They were strangers thrown together by circumstance, each carrying their own secrets, their own reasons for heading toward Lordsburg despite the danger. Outside, the landscape grew rougher, more desolate. Arroyos cut across the road like wounds in the earth, and the scrub brush gave way to scattered juniper and pinon. At the Dry Fork station, they found chaos waiting. The cavalry escort was preparing to pull out, and the station keeper's wife, a formidable woman named Mrs. Pickett, was frantically trying to load her children into a buckboard. "Great heavens to Betsy!" Doc exclaimed as he climbed down from the coach. "Didn't figure on no stagecoach coming through with them Apaches raising Cain." Sergeant Billy Pickett, Doc's old friend, helped the passengers down. "I was just telling Billy to hitch up the buckboard so we could get the young ones in." "Wait a minute," Gatewood interrupted. "You mean to say there are no troops at this station?" Mrs. Pickett's face was grim. "Ain't no soldiers here but what you see." Lucy swayed slightly, gripping the coach door for support. "But my husband, Captain Mallory, I was told he was here." "He was, dearie. Got orders night afore last to join the soldiers at Apache Wells." Buck's voice rose in panic. "That means we gotta go back." "I can't go back," Gatewood protested. "Driver, you started this coach for Lordsburg, and it's your duty to get us there." The argument swirled around them, voices rising in fear and anger. Curly finally silenced them all with a sharp whistle. "Now, folks, if we push on, we can be in Apache Wells by sundown. Soldiers there will give us an escort as far as the ferry, then it's only a hoot and a holler into Lordsburg." He turned to Lucy. "Now, Miss Mallory, I ain't going to put a lady in danger without she votes for it." Lucy's voice was steady despite the pallor of her face. "I've traveled all the way here from Virginia. I'm determined to get to my husband. I won't be separated any longer." One by one, the passengers cast their votes. Doc, characteristically, turned it into a philosophical discourse about fate and bullets and bottles. Peacock stammered his way through a confused speech about bosoms, both familial and protective. Hatfield voted simply Lordsburg, his eyes never leaving Lucy's face. When it came to Gatewood, the banker's voice shook with barely controlled panic. "I demand it. I'm standing on my legal rights." Dallas, when asked, shrugged. "What difference does it make? Doesn't matter. I vote that we go on." "Well, folks, that settles it," Curly announced. "We're going through." Mrs. Pickett set out food on rough wooden tables, and the passengers filed into the station house to eat. The meal was simple: beans, salt pork, biscuits hard as rocks, but after hours in the coach, it was welcome. Ringo found himself watching Dallas as she moved to a table by herself, isolated by an invisible wall of propriety that no one would cross. He picked up his plate and walked over to her. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up, startled. "Looks like I got the plague, don't it?" "No." He settled across from her, his handcuffs clinking against the wooden table. "No, it's not you." Dallas studied him for a long moment. This young man who should have been frightened for his life, but instead seemed more concerned with her isolation. "Well, I guess you can't break out of prison and into society in the same week." Before Ringo could respond, Lucy Mallory suddenly stood, swaying on her feet. Her face had gone chalk white, and her breathing came in short, shallow gasps. "Please!" Dallas was on her feet instantly, reaching out. "Please. You're ill, Mrs. Mallory." "No, it's just that I—" Lucy's words dissolved into a gasp. "I'll be all right. You've been very kind." Hatfield was there in an instant, his hands gentle as he guided Lucy to a chair. "Why? In the world I live in, one doesn't often meet a lady, Mrs. Mallory." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, or the ghost of a shared past. "Have you ever been in Virginia?" Lucy asked softly. "I was in your father's regiment." Lucy's eyes narrowed as she studied his face. I should remember your name. You're Mr. Hatfield. That's what I'm called, yes. Dallas interrupted the exchange. I know you. I know who you are. I guess everybody in the territory does. Ringo's smile was sad. Yep. Well, I used to be a good cowhand, but things happened. Yeah, that's it. Things happened. And now they'll take you back to prison, Dallas said. Not till I finish a job in Lordsburg. But you can't. You're going there as a prisoner. Curly's voice cut through the conversation. All aboard for Apache Wells, Lee's Ferry, and Lordsburg, maybe. The passengers filed back to the coach, Lucy leaning heavily on Hatfield's arm, Dallas walking alone, Ringo between them all, neither outcast nor accepted, but something in between. As Buck whipped up the horses and the coach rolled away from Dry Fork, the cavalry detachment turned back toward Tonto.
They were on their own now, 9 souls in a wooden box rolling through Apache territory with nothing but hope and ammunition between them and Geronimo's warriors. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly as they climbed into higher country. The road wound through stands of juniper and pine, following ancient game trails that had been widened into something approaching a wagon track. Buck kept up his running commentary, talking to his horses, to Curly, to himself. What'd you say? Curly asked at one point. Nothing. Well, why don't you say something? A fella gets nervous, sitting here like a dummy, nothing to think about but the Indians. You say something. You've been sitting there all day talking without making any sense. All right, I'll say something that makes sense. If I was you, I'd let 'em shoot it out. Let who? Luke Plummer and the kid. There'd be a lot more peace in this territory if that Luke Plummer was so full of lead he couldn't hold his liquor. Curly's expression was grim. I ain't saying I don't share your sentiments, Buck, but you're a born fool. In the first place, Luke would kill the kid in a gunfight. In the second place, if Luke did get shot, he's got 2 brothers just as ornery as he is. Nah, the only safe place for Ringo is in the pen, and I aim to get him there all in one piece. Inside the coach, an uneasy silence had fallen. Lucy's condition was worsening visibly with each mile. Her breathing had become labored, and she pressed one hand against her side as though in pain. Dallas noticed but kept her concern to herself, knowing that any expression of sympathy would be unwelcome. Gatewood clutched his satchel and muttered about government interference and bank examiners. Doc worked his way steadily through Peacock's samples, growing more philosophical with each drink. And Hatfield sat rigid, his eyes fixed on Lucy's face with an intensity that spoke of something deeper than mere gallantry. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and red that looked disturbingly like fire, Ringo found himself watching Dallas. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the passing landscape, and there was something in her expression, a kind of quiet dignity, that moved him in ways he didn't fully understand. He'd known plenty of women in his short life, ranch girls who giggled and flirted at dances, Mexican senoritas who sold tortillas in the plaza, even a school teacher once who'd tried to reform him. But Dallas was different. She'd been beaten down by life, judged and found wanting by people who had no right to judge, yet she held her head high. She didn't apologize for existing, didn't beg for acceptance she knew wouldn't come. The coach hit a particularly rough patch of road, and they were all thrown together in a tangle of arms and legs. In the confusion, Ringo's hand briefly touched Dallas's, and he felt her stiffen, then relax. Their eyes met for just a moment, and in that moment something shifted between them, an understanding perhaps, or the beginning of one. Outside, the sun sank lower, the shadows grew longer, and somewhere in the hills around them, smoke signals rose against the darkening sky, spelling out messages in a language the white men couldn't read but understood well enough. Geronimo was on the move, and the hunt was on. The road to Apache Wells climbed steadily into country where pine trees stood like sentinels, and the air carried the scent of resin and distant snow. Buck guided his team with the skill of long practice, calling out encouragement to each horse by name, his voice rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed to calm both the animals and himself. "Maybe you'd like to sit next to me," Ringo said quietly to Dallas, his voice pitched low enough that the others wouldn't hear. "You could put your head on my shoulder." Dallas's throat tightened. The kindness in his offer was almost harder to bear than the contempt she'd grown accustomed to. "No, thank you." Hatfield leaned forward, his gambler's eyes fixed on Lucy's increasingly pale face. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Mallory?" "Is there any water?" Lucy's voice was barely a whisper. "Driver, canteen, please," Hatfield called out. Buck passed down a battered military canteen, and Hatfield uncapped it with practiced ease. But before he offered it to Lucy, his eyes caught on something, an engraving on the canteen's surface, a family crest worked into the metal. "Haven't I seen this crest before?" Lucy asked, her fingers tracing the design. "Isn't this from Greenfield Manor?" Hatfield's expression remained carefully neutral. "I wouldn't know, Mrs. Mallory. I won this cup on a wager." Lucy's eyes searched his face, questions forming that she was too weak to ask. Whatever history lay between them, or between their families, would have to wait. "How about the other lady?" Hatfield asked, turning to Dallas. Dallas accepted the plain tin cup Ringo offered without comment, grateful that someone had thought to ask. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it cut through the dust in her throat. The coach climbed higher, and the temperature began to drop. By the time the sun touched the western peaks, turning them blood red against the darkening sky, the passengers were shivering in their light clothing. The wind that swept down from the snowfields above carried winter's promise, and with it, the low mournful howl of something that might have been coyotes or might have been something far more dangerous. Buck pulled his collar up around his ears. "Those breech-clad Apaches don't like snow," he muttered to Curly, as if trying to convince himself. The marshal said nothing, his eyes scanning the ridgelines where the last light caught on rocks that might have been natural formations or might have been watching men. Inside the coach, the cold worked its way through wool and cotton. Dallas wrapped her thin shawl more tightly around her shoulders, her teeth chattering despite her efforts to remain stoic. She didn't see Ringo watching her, didn't notice when he shifted position to block some of the wind that whistled through the gaps in the coach's frame. Doc had progressed from philosophical to maudlin, singing snatches of old army songs in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. Peacock had given up trying to protect his samples and sat in miserable silence, contemplating the wife and children he might never see again. Gatewood's knuckles were white where he gripped his satchel, his mind racing through calculations of distance and time and the possibility of pursuit. As darkness fell completely, Buck called out to his team. "Yow, girls!" The Apache Wells station materialized out of the gloom like something from a fever dream. Oil lamps cast pools of yellow light across a dusty plaza, and the smell of wood smoke and cooking meat drifted on the wind. But something was wrong. The place felt abandoned, the silence too complete. Chris, the station keeper, emerged from the shadows, his weathered face breaking into a smile of relief. 7 hours from Dry Fork. Pretty fast driving, amigo." "Get the folks a bite to eat, Chris, while we change horses," Buck called down. "We're pushing on to Lordsburg." Chris's smile faded. "You come without soldiers." "Oh, we weren't scared," Buck said with false bravado. "We didn't see one Apache, did we, Curly?" "Where's the cavalry, Chris?" Curly's voice was flat, already knowing the answer. "Where's the soldiers? There ain't no soldiers." Lucy was on her feet before anyone could stop her, her face desperate. "Where's Captain Mallory? Where's my husband? Where is he?" Chris turned to her, his expression sympathetic. "You're his wife, I think?" "Yes." "Where is he? Did he go with his men?" "Si, senora. Little what you call it. Scrimmage with the Apaches last night. Soldiers take Captain Mallory to Lordsburg. I think he get hurt, maybe." The word hit Lucy like a physical blow. "Badly?" "Si, senora. I think so." Lucy swayed, and both Hatfield and Dallas reached for her simultaneously. For a moment, their hands touched as they steadied the pregnant woman, and Dallas felt the other woman's weight shift against her shoulder. "Mrs. Mallory, I'm awfully sorry," Ringo began. "If there's anything I can—" "I'm quite all right, thank you." But her voice was fading, her words coming slower. "Marshal, come here, quickly!" Chris's urgency cut through the night. Curly jumped down and followed the station keeper into the building. Dallas helped Lucy toward a bench, supporting her with surprising strength. The other woman's body was burning with fever, her breathing rapid and shallow. "Doc," Dallas called, her voice sharp with command. "Come on, Doc, let's go." Boone stumbled out of the coach, trying to shake off the fog of whiskey. When he saw Lucy's condition, something shifted in his expression. the professional physician pushing through years of dissolution. Inside, Chris's wife, Yakima, moved through the lamplight like a shadow. She was Apache, her dark eyes missing nothing as she assessed the situation with the kind of practical wisdom that came from living on the edge of civilization. "A sick woman on our hands," Gatewood complained. "That's all we needed." "We're in a nice fix, my friends," Peacock agreed miserably. "It's a nice country we're living in. The army has no right to leave a public place like this undefended." Ringo's voice cut through their complaints. "Looks to me like the army's got its hands pretty full, mister." Chris turned to his wife. "Yakima, ¿dónde estás?" The Apache woman appeared in the doorway, and Chris gestured urgently. "Have you a wife?" he asked Doc. "Si, senora, I think," Chris answered instead. "Call her." Doc was already moving, his training overriding his condition. "Ringo, go in the kitchen and get some hot water. Lots of hot water, please." "Yes, ma'am." Ringo followed Chris toward the back of the station. "A fine member of the medical profession," Gatewood sneered. "Drunken beast." Dallas whirled on him, her green eyes flashing. "He's doing the best he can." "Coffee," Doc said to Curly, his words precise despite the tremor in his hands. "Give me coffee. Black coffee. Lots of it." They poured it into him, cup after scalding cup, while he gripped the table and fought his way back towards something approaching sobriety. His face was gray, sweat beading on his forehead, but his eyes were clearing. "More, more, more," he demanded. "Ain't it enough, Doc?" Curly asked. "That's 4. Blacker, stronger. Keep it coming, Curly." "You'll have it coming out your ears in a minute." Gatewood paced near the door, his agitation growing. "Isn't that drunken swine sober yet?" Dallas stepped between him and Doc, her voice low and dangerous. "Well, hurry." Curly's hand moved to his gun. "Shh, está malo. Tin horn," he added under his breath. When Doc could finally stand without swaying, Curly asked, "How you feeling?" Doc's exhale was shaky, but his voice was steady. "Fine. Thanks. Again." "Sit down here, Doc." Curly guided him to a chair near the fire. "Keep the fire going, Chris. Plenty of hot water." "Si, senor. Si." Chris turned to his wife, speaking rapidly in Spanish. "Ándale pronto, a calentar agua. A la enferma, pronto." Yakima moved to obey, her movements efficient and sure. Gatewood watched her with undisguised distrust. "Savages!" Chris's laugh was humorless. "That's my wife, Yakima. My squaw." "Yes, but she's savage." "Si, senor. She a little bit savage, I think. Maybe not so bad to have Apache wife, eh? Apache don't bother me, I think." Doc stood, testing his balance, then nodded to Dallas. "All right, Doc?" "All right." They moved toward the room where Lucy lay, and the door closed behind them. The men settled into an uncomfortable wait, the kind that happened when women's business took over and there was nothing to do but sit and pray and try not to think about what might be happening behind that closed door. From somewhere in this darkness beyond the station, a guitar began to play, one of Chris's Mexican hands seeking comfort in music. A woman's voice joined it, rich and mournful, singing in Spanish about lost homes and distant loves. "Al pensar en ti, tierra en que nací." The song drifted through the night, and despite themselves, the waiting men fell silent, listening. Even Gatewood stopped his pacing. Even Peacock's nervous fidgeting stilled. Inside the room, Dallas worked alongside Doc with surprising competence. She'd seen enough of life's harder edges to know what needed doing, and she did it without flinching. Lucy's labor had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back now. "You're going to be all right," Dallas whispered, wiping Lucy's forehead with a damp cloth. "Just hold on. You're going to see your husband. You're going to show him his child." Lucy's fingers gripped Dallas's hand with desperate strength. Whatever walls had existed between them had crumbled in the face of this primal struggle. In this moment, they were just 2 women, one fighting for life, one helping her fight. Doc's hands were steady as he worked, all the training from before the war coming back to him. He delivered hundreds of babies once, in a life that seemed like it had belonged to someone else entirely. But the knowledge was still there, buried beneath the whiskey and the self-loathing. "That's it," he murmured. "That's the way." Just a little more now. Outside, the night deepened. The song ended and another began. Then suddenly, both stopped. The musicians had seen something or heard something, and the silence that followed was absolute. Buck stood in the doorway, staring out into the darkness. Them coyotes give me the creeps. It sounds it sounds just like a baby. Then cutting through the night came the unmistakable sound of an infant's cry. Buck's face split into a grin. It's a baby. It's a little girl. Curly let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. It's a little girl. Well, I'll be doggoned. The men crowded toward the door of the room, peering in like children at Christmas. Doc emerged, his shirt soaked with sweat, his face exhausted but wearing an expression of quiet triumph. Well, I'll be doggoned, Buck repeated. Why didn't somebody tell me? How's Mrs. Mallory? She's going to be all right, Doc said simply. Well, I'll be doggoned. Buck couldn't seem to find any other words. Did you know? Why, well, I'll be doggoned. Ringo pushed forward. Dr. Boone. Come on, boys, Curly said, his voice rough with emotion. 3 cheers for old Doc Boone. Hip, hip. Quiet, Doc commanded, but there was no heat in it. Mrs. Mallory needs rest. He disappeared back into the room, and after a moment, Dallas emerged. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, her dress marked with the evidence of hard work, but her eyes were bright. She'd helped bring life into the world, and something in that act had touched a place in her that she'd thought long dead. Ringo was waiting near the door, and their eyes met. No words were needed. He understood what she was feeling, saw it written in every line of her body. The baby's cries settled into small mewling sounds, then silence. Inside the room, Lucy slept the sleep of the utterly spent, her newborn daughter nestled against her side. Doc sat in a chair by the bed, his medical bag open beside him, looking more like a doctor than he had in 10 years. Dallas found Ringo in the kitchen, where he'd been heating water. They stood together in the dim lamplight, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. Kid, I know why you want to go to Lordsburg, Chris said, appearing in the doorway. I like you. I know your pop. He was a good friend of mine. If you know who in Lordsburg, you stay away, I think. You mean Luke Plummer? Ringo's voice was carefully neutral. Luke, Ike, and Hank, all there together. I saw them. Are you sure of that, Chris? Sure. I can tell you the truth. You crazy if you go. I think you stay away, kid. 3 against 1 is no good. Ringo's jaw tightened. My father and brother were shot down by the Plummer boys. Guess you don't know how it feels to lose your own folks that way. Dallas's voice was soft when she spoke. I lost mine when I was a kid. There was a massacre on Superstition Mountain. Ringo turned to her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. That's tough, especially on a girl. Well, you gotta live no matter what happens. Yeah, that's it. He studied her face in the lamplight, seeing the scars that didn't show on the surface, the strength that had kept her standing when lesser souls would have broken. Look, Miss Dallas, you got no folks, and neither have I, and, well, maybe I'm taking a lot for granted, but I watched you with that baby, that other woman's baby. You looked, well, he paused, searching for words that wouldn't come easily to a man who'd spent more time with cattle than with people. Well, I still got a ranch across the border, and it's a nice place, a real nice place. Trees and grass, water. There's a cabin half built. A man could live there. And a woman. Will you go? Dallas's eyes filled with tears. But you don't know me. You don't know who I am. I know all I want to know. His voice was absolute in its certainty. Will you go? The tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. Oh, don't talk like that. But even as she protested, she was seeing it, the cabin, the trees, the water, a life that didn't involve back alleys and contempt and the kind of survival that wore away at the soul, a life where she could be the woman she'd once dreamed of being, before the world had taught her that such dreams were not for girls like her. Curly's voice shattered the moment. What are you doing out here, kid? Stick close to the reservation. Before Ringo could answer, Chris came bursting in, his face wild with panic. Curly! Oh, Curly! Curly! What's wrong, Chris? My wife, Yakima, she run away. When I wake up, she was gone. Curly's hand moved to his gun instinctively. Whoa!
Excuse me, kid. Come busting in here, you'd think we were being attacked. You can find another wife. Sure, I can find another wife. But she'd take my rifle and my horse. Oh, I never sell her. I love her so much. I beat her with the whip, and she never get tired. Curly's eyebrows rose. Your wife? No? My horse. I can find another wife easy, yes, but not a horse like that. Malayakama. Gatewood had been dozing in a corner, his precious satchel clutched to his chest. The commotion woke him, and he sat up with a start, his hands frantically patting the bag. My valise.
Where's my valise? Which one of you have got it?
Peacock held it up from where he'd been using it as a pillow. Here it is. I was using it for a pillow. I didn't think you'd mind. Gatewood snatched it away. I thought I told you to keep your hands off my things. Yes, sir. Chris was still wringing his hands. That squaw of yours will find some Apaches and bring them back here. My wife's people don't bother me, I think. Well, they bother me, I think. Gatewood's voice was shrill with panic. Doc appeared in the doorway, his face grave. Chris, is this bar open? Sure, all the time, senor. Si. Good. Doc moved toward the bottles with the single-minded purpose of a man who'd sobered up long enough and now desperately needed to not think about what he'd just accomplished. Here you are, Doc. Gatewood was on his feet, his fear making him reckless. Well, what are we wasting time for? Let's make a break for it. We got a sick woman to think of, Ringo said quietly.
Do you want her to stay here and be butchered with the rest of us? Why don't you think of somebody else for once? Hatfield's voice was cold as winter steel. Do you realize who you're talking to? Easy, easy. Quiet, boys, quiet. Curly stepped between them. We ain't been butchered yet, but you're right. We better get going for Lordsburg as soon as we can. He turned to Doc. Might be a good idea, Curly, if, Doc took a look at the patient. Yeah, and little Coyote. Doc's voice held the faintest trace of affection. You'll join me, Doctor? No, thanks. Morning came reluctantly, the sun struggling to burn through a haze that might have been natural or might have been smoke from distant fires. Dallas sat in a chair beside Lucy's bed, the baby cradled in her arms. She hadn't slept, had spent the night watching over the mother and child, and her face showed the strain. Morning, Doc said, entering with surprising steadiness. Well, you're looking pretty chipper. You're up early, Dallas. Lucy's voice was weak but clear. She didn't go to bed, Doctor. I'm afraid she sat up all night while I slept. Oh, I slept a lot in the chair. Dallas's lie was transparent but kind. Well, anyway, it was nice to stay awake and hold the baby. Well, we've got to get you to Lordsburg, little Coyote. That's what the boys christened her last night when she squalled. Little Coyote. Lucy managed a faint smile at the nickname. How do you feel? Fine, thanks. A little tired. Doctor, do you think my husband— Never mind him, Doc interrupted gently. The best medicine he can have is to see you two safe and sound. You just make up your mind you're going to get there. I have made up my mind, Lucy said with quiet determination. I am going to get there. That's the stuff. You need strength, so get all the rest you can. Dallas, do you suppose you can fix up a little broth? She has already, Lucy said, her eyes on Dallas with new understanding. Good. How about making some coffee for the boys? Now you get some sleep, Mrs. Mallory, and don't look so proud. I've brought hundreds of those little fellas into the world, once upon a time, and the new one was always the prettiest. Outside the room, Dallas found Ringo waiting. He led her away from the others to a place where they could speak without being overheard. Doc, Dallas said when they found Boone checking his medical bag, Ringo asked me to marry him. Is that wrong for a girl like me? If a man and woman love each other, it's all right, ain't it, Doc? Doc's expression was weary with the weight of too much knowledge. You're going to be hurt, child, worse than you've ever been hurt. Don't you know that boy's headed back for prison? Besides, if you two go into Lordsburg together, he's going to know all about you. He's not going into Lordsburg, Dallas said, but her voice lacked conviction. All I want is for you to tell me it's all right. Doc looked at her for a long moment, seeing the hope in her eyes, the desperate need to believe that redemption was possible. Gosh, child, who am I to tell you what's right or wrong? All right, go ahead. Do it if you can. Good luck. Thanks, Doc.
The argument about whether to continue came to a head in the main room. Curly called everyone together, his face set in hard lines. "Well, Doc, can we move her?" "Oh, both doing nicely. She's a real soldier's wife, that young lady." "Good, good. Then we can leave immediately." Doc shook his head. "Well, not for a day or so if you want my professional advice." "What do you mean a day? Stay another day? Why?" "Where were you when the stork came last night, Gatewood? I refuse to allow Mrs. Mallory to travel until she and the child are out of danger." Gatewood's face turned purple. "What do you mean danger? Aren't we in worse danger here?" Peacock cleared his throat apologetically. "I don't wish to intrude, but I've had 5 children. I mean, my dear wife has. And much as I dislike discussing it in this hour of our trial, I believe the doctor's right." "Spoken like a man, Reverend," Doc said warmly. "I say we ought to leave here before the Apaches find us," Gatewood insisted. "That's common sense." "I wish you were 10 years younger, Gatewood," Doc replied. "Don't let my white hairs stop you. Now just a minute." Both men surged forward. "Quiet, quiet." Curly fired his pistol into the ceiling, and silence fell like a curtain. "Now, if we argue this thing outright, we can get somewhere. Let's all sit down and talk sensible. Come on, Buck, sit down." The debate raged for an hour, with Gatewood growing more desperate and Doc more adamant. Finally, Curly made the decision. "We stay till morning. Mrs. Mallory and the baby need that much at least. Then we push straight through to Lordsburg, no matter what." Gatewood subsided with ill grace, clutching his satchel and calculating the odds of his pursuers catching up. The others settled in to wait, each lost in their own thoughts. In the kitchen, Ringo found Dallas grinding coffee. The morning light slanted through the window, illuminating her profile, and he realized with startling clarity that he'd never felt this way about anyone before. "Morning, ma'am." "Morning. I laid awake most of the night wondering what you'd have said if Curly hadn't busted in." Dallas's hand stilled on the grinder. "Guess you was up kinda late, too. I could hear you moving around." "You didn't answer what I asked you last night." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Look, kid, why don't you try to escape? There's a horse out there in the corral. Curly won't go after you because he can't leave the passengers in a fix like this." "I gotta go to Lordsburg." "Why don't you go to my ranch and wait for me? Wait for a dead man." Ringo's jaw set stubbornly. "You haven't got a chance. It was 3 against 1 when the plumbers swore that you killed their foreman, got you sent up. It'll be 3 against 1 in Lordsburg." "Well, there's some things a man just can't run away from." Dallas's voice rose with frustration and fear. "How can you talk about your life and my life when you're throwing them away? That's what you're throwing away if you go to Lordsburg. Mine too." "What do you want me to do? Would it make us any happier if Luke Plummer was dead? One of his brothers would be after you with a gun. We'd never be safe. I don't want that kind of life, Ringo." "Well, I don't see what else I can do." "Go now. Get away. Forget Lordsburg. Forget the plumbers. Make for the border and I'll come to you." Ringo stared at her, hope warring with duty in his expression. "Do you mean that?" "Yes, I do." "Will you go with me, Dallas?" "Oh, I can't leave Mrs. Mallory and the baby. I'll come to you from Lordsburg. I swear it." Dallas reached into her skirt and pulled out a rifle, the one Yakima had stolen, now recovered from where the Apache woman had hidden it. "I've got one. Right here. I got it last night when they were all asleep." "You mean you thought of this last night?" "Yeah, don't ask any more questions, not now." The plan was simple and desperate and probably doomed to fail. But it was a chance, the only one they were likely to get. Ringo would take the rifle and a horse and head for the border. Dallas would continue to Lordsburg with the coach, help Mrs. Mallory get settled with her wounded husband, and then follow. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something to hope for, and hope was a luxury neither of them had enjoyed in a long time. Outside, Curly was arguing with Chris about the route. "Oh gosh, there ain't no Apaches behind us. We can still go back to Tonto." "No, I insist we go on to Lordsburg," Gatewood said, his voice shrill. "What do you think, Chris?" "Geronimo between here and Lordsburg. With my horse, I think." Doc had found Chris's bar and was making good use of it, his brief flirtation with sobriety firmly in the past. He'd done what needed doing,
brought a child into this harsh world, and now he wanted only to forget that he'd once been capable of such things.
"No, Doctor," Peacock protested weakly as Doc reached for another bottle. "Quiet, Doc. This is a serious matter, ain't it?" Doc's laugh was bitter. "My dear Buck, if I have only 1 hour to live, I'm going to enjoy myself. Doctor, I don't begrudge you my samples, but I think, now you hush. I've stood enough of you. Now this is a serious problem, and I'm the only one that's talking sense. If we can get across that ferry, we'll be all right. Question is, what are we going to do about the lady and her baby?" "Dr. Boone has settled that for us, sir," Hatfield said quietly, "and I demand respect for his professional opinion."
Ringo slipped out of the back door, moving toward the corral where the horses waited. His heart hammered in his chest, not from fear but from the unfamiliar sensation of hope. A ranch across the border, Dallas waiting for him, a life that wasn't defined by violence and revenge. He was saddling the horse when Curly's voice cut through his thoughts like a knife. "Ringo!" The kid froze, then slowly turned to find the marshal standing in the doorway, his Winchester leveled at Ringo's chest. "Hurry, Ringo!" Dallas called from behind Curly, her voice breaking. "Ringo!" Curly's command was absolute. Dallas pushed past the marshal. "Don't stop! Go on! Go on! Keep riding! Ringo, go on! Go on!" But Ringo was already dismounting, his hands raised. "Curly, no! Let him go!" Dallas grabbed for Curly's arm, trying to spoil his aim, but the marshal was immovable. "Stop it! You don't need them, Curly." "I ain't gonna run away," Ringo said quietly, and Dallas heard her hopes crumbling in those 5 words. Curly studied the young man for a long moment, then lowered the rifle. "Look at them hills." They all turned to where he pointed. On the ridgeline, clearly visible in the morning light, smoke signals rose in complex patterns, each one echoing and amplifying the last. "Apaches," Curly said unnecessarily. "War signals." Gatewood came running from the station, his face white with terror. "Hurry up, Marshal. Why don't we start?" The passengers piled into the coach with none of the ceremony of the previous day. There was no time for courtesy now, no time for anything but the desperate hope that they could outrun what was coming. Buck gathered his reins, his voice high and tight, as he called to his team. "Come on, bridesmaid, yow, yow, nice girls, yow, go!" The coach lurched forward, gaining speed as Buck whipped the horses into a gallop. Inside, the passengers bounced and swayed, holding on to whatever they could find. The baby woke and began to cry, a thin wail that somehow cut through all the other noise. "Hey, Curly!" Buck called over the thunder of hooves and wheels. "Why don't you take the cuffs off the kid? He's mighty handy with a gun." "You drive them horses. I'll take care of the kid." The road descended from the high country in a series of switchbacks, each turn revealing new vistas of desert and sky. Behind them, more smoke signals rose. Ahead of them, the burned-out ferry and the river beyond, and somewhere in between, Geronimo and his warriors were closing the trap. The stagecoach careened down the mountain road, wheels slamming against rocks and ruts hard enough to rattle teeth and bones. Inside, the passengers clung to leather straps and each other, their faces pale with the knowledge that speed was now their only defense. "Can't you drive any faster?" Gatewood shrieked, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You thick-headed lout! We've got to make that ferry!" Buck's response was lost in the thunder of hooves, but his whip cracked over the horses' heads like gunfire. The team stretched out, running flat now, their sides heaving and foam flying from their bits. Gatewood clutched his satchel to his chest, his knuckles white. A man works all his life to get a hold of some money so that he can enjoy life and has to run into a trap like this. "A trap, brother?" Peacock's voice quavered. "You mean the Apaches?" "There's been no sign of them." Ringo's voice cut through the banker's complaints like cold steel. "You don't see any signs of them. They strike like rattlesnakes." Gatewood turned on him, fear making him vicious. "If you hadn't insisted on waiting for her, we'd have been across the ferry by this time." Hatfield's hand moved to his coat. "You talk too much, Gatewood. Your threats don't faze me, Hatfield. You're nothing but a tin-horn gambler. How would you like to get out and walk?" Hatfield's voice was soft, dangerous. "You can't put me out of a public conveyance." Now, gentlemen, gentlemen," Peacock's attempt at peacemaking was drowned out by another violent lurch of the coach. Doc leaned forward, his breath heavy with whiskey. "Take it easy, Gatewood. We may need that fight before we get to the ferry." "You wouldn't be much good in a fight, you jailbird." Gatewood's words were meant for Doc, but his eyes were on Ringo. "Oh, leave the kid alone," Hatfield said quietly. "He's handcuffed." Peacock clicked his tongue in distress. "Gentlemen, please, let's not forget the ladies, bless them. Let's have a little Christian charity one for the other." But the words fell into empty air. Each of them was alone now, with their fear, their regrets, their desperate calculations of survival. Lucy held little Coyote close, her body curved protectively around the infant, despite her own weakness. Dallas sat rigid beside her, one hand braced against the coach's frame, the other ready to steady the mother and child when the next violent jolt came. Outside, Buck's voice rose in a constant stream of encouragement and profanity. "Well, folks, we're coming into Lee's Ferry now. Lordsburg, next stop. Nice girls, get along, get along." Then his voice changed, rising to a note that made every spine in the coach straighten with dread. "Curly, look at the ferry. It's burnt too." The coach slowed, and through the windows they could see the blackened timbers jutting from the river like broken teeth. The ferry platform was nothing but charred planks and twisted metal, still smoking from whatever fire had consumed it. On the far bank, more smoke rose, and the station house was a skeleton of burned wood against the sky. "Hatfield, stand guard over there," Curly commanded, dropping from the driver's box with his Winchester already raised. Gatewood's voice rose to a shriek. "Where's the army? What are the soldiers doing? Are they going to let Geronimo burn and pillage the whole country?" Doc climbed down with surprising steadiness. "Curly, what can I do?" "Ringo, I need you." The marshal's eyes met the kids, and some wordless understanding passed between them. "Will you give me your word you won't try to escape again?" "I'll give you my word, to Lordsburg." Dallas had been listening from inside the coach, and now she pushed the door open. "Ringo, don't!" "Dallas," but Ringo was already moving toward Curly. "Get in the coach with them women," Curly said, tossing Ringo the keys to the handcuffs. "I gave you my word." The cuffs fell away, and Ringo rubbed his wrists where the metal had chafed. His hands felt strange without the weight, almost too light. Buck was already urging the team toward the river. "Brownie? Bessie? Bridesmaid? Come on, girls. Ha! Get down! Move out! Ho!" The horses plunged into the water, which rose quickly around the wheels. "Whoa, Duchess! Come on, baby! Come on, girls! Steady now!" Curly scanned the ridge lines, his jaw tight. "Look out, Curly!" "Kid, take your suspenders and cross-tie them wheelers." Ringo moved without hesitation, wading into the current to secure the lead horses. The water was cold, fed by snowmelt from the mountains, and the current pulled at his legs with deceptive strength. "Sorry about the saddle, kid," Curly called. "Ready, kid?" "All set." "Ready, Buck?" "All ready, Curly?" The marshal's voice rang out over the rush of water. "Here we go! Here we go, Buck! Yah! Yah!" Ringo slapped the lead horse's flanks, and the team surged forward into deeper water. Inside the coach, Dallas braced herself and Lucy against the violent rocking. "Just sit quiet, folks. You'll be all right." Buck's voice was a constant encouragement over the roar of the river. "Come on, girl. Ho, bridesmaid. Come on, baby. Good girl. Ho! Steady, Duchess. Steady there. Atta girl. Honey child." The coach rocked violently as the wheels found purchase on the rocky riverbed, then lurched forward as the horses pulled with everything they had. Water poured through the floorboards, soaking their feet, and little Coyote's cries rose to compete with the sound of the current. "Easy now, ho! Good girl! That's a girl! Whoa!" The far bank rose before them, and with one final heave, the horses dragged the coach up out of the water and onto dry ground. Buck let out a whoop of triumph. "All aboard for Lordsburg, Lordsburg!" But Curly's face was grim as he climbed back up beside Buck. He'd seen something on the ridge during the crossing, a flash of movement that might have been a bird or might have been something far more dangerous. As the coach climbed away from the river, Buck tried to recapture some levity. "Hey, Curly." "Yeah, what? You think I ought to charge Mrs. Mallory's baby half fare?" Curly's grunt might have been amusement or might have been warning. "Sweetheart!" The afternoon sun beat down without mercy as they pushed on toward Lordsburg. The horses were tiring now, their pace slower despite Buck's encouragement. They'd been running hard for hours, and even the best team in the territory had limits. "Well, we'll soon be in Lordsburg," Buck said, but his voice lacked conviction. Inside the coach, an uneasy silence had settled. Gatewood stared out the window, his lips moving in some private calculation. Peacock had his eyes closed, possibly in prayer, possibly in the hope that if he couldn't see death coming, it might pass him by. Doc had retrieved yet another flask from somewhere and was drinking with the methodical determination of a man trying to reach oblivion before the arrows did. Hatfield sat with his eyes fixed on Lucy's face, watching the play of light and shadow across her features. Sorry, I flew off the handle, Hatfield," Gatewood said suddenly, his fear making him conciliatory. "My apologies, Doctor," Hatfield replied, though his eyes never left Lucy. "No hard feelings, I hope." Doc waved a hand magnanimously. "All in all, it's been an exciting, very interesting trip, has it not?" "Well, now that the danger's passed, Mr. Peacock." The whiskey drummer managed a weak smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, since it's most unlikely that we'll ever have the pleasure of meeting again socially, I'd like to propose a toast." But before anyone could respond, Buck's voice cut through the air. "Yow!" The first arrow struck the side of the coach with a solid thunk that made everyone freeze. For one heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Then the world exploded into chaos. More arrows whistled through the air, some striking the coach, others hissing past to bury themselves in the road. A rifle cracked from the rocks above, and Buck's hat went flying. "Yow! Yow!" Buck's voice rose to a scream as he whipped the horses into a full gallop. "Curly, more ammunition!" The marshal was already firing, the Winchester kicking against his shoulder as he aimed at shapes that appeared and disappeared among the rocks. Inside the coach, Ringo was at the window, his borrowed pistol barking steadily. An Apache warrior broke from cover, racing his paint pony alongside the coach. His face was painted for war, his rifle rising. Ringo fired twice, and the warrior tumbled from his horse in a spray of dust. "Keep down!" Dallas shouted, pushing Lucy and the baby to the floor of the coach. She threw herself over them, her body a shield even as arrows punched through the coach's thin walls. Hatfield fired methodically from the opposite window, his gambler's hand steady as he worked the lever of his rifle. Each shot was placed with precision. No wasted ammunition, no panic. Whatever else he might be, the man could shoot. Doc fumbled for a gun, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold it. But when an Apache appeared at the window beside him, the old physician fired point blank, and the warrior fell away. The attack came in waves. Warriors would emerge from the rocks, fire a volley of arrows and rifle shots, then fade back before the defenders could draw a bead. It was a running fight, brutal and chaotic, with the stagecoach as the only target. Buck drove like a man possessed, standing in the box and screaming at his horses. "Yow! Yow! Yow!" The reins cut into his hands, drawing blood, but he never slackened his grip. An arrow caught Curly in the shoulder, spinning him half around. He grunted but kept firing, switching the rifle to his good arm without missing a beat. Blood soaked his shirt, dark and spreading. Inside the coach, Peacock huddled in a corner, his samples forgotten, his face the color of old wax. "We're all going to die," he whimpered. "We're all going to die." "Shut up," Gatewood snarled, his own fear making him vicious. But his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't have held a gun if someone had given him one. Ringo's pistol clicked on an empty chamber. "Curly, more ammunition!" The marshal tossed down a box, and Ringo caught it one-handed, already reloading. His fingers were steady, his movements practiced from years on the range where a man's life often depended on how fast he could reload. The coach hit a rut, and everyone was thrown violently to one side. Little Coyote's cries rose above the gunfire, a thin wail of terror and confusion. Lucy clutched her daughter, her body curled protectively around the infant, while Dallas continued to shield them both. An Apache on a spotted pony came alongside, so close that Ringo could see the individual feathers in his war bonnet. The warrior's rifle swung toward the coach window, toward Dallas and Lucy and the baby. Ringo fired, and the warrior jerked backward, his rifle falling away. But there were more. Always more. They came from the rocks, from arroyos, from stands of juniper that seemed too sparse to hide a rabbit, much less a mounted warrior. The Apaches fought with the tactical brilliance that had kept them alive and free in this harsh country for generations, hitting and fading, never committing to a full assault but bleeding the coach with 1,000 small cuts. Hatfield's rifle cracked again, and another warrior fell. But an arrow had caught the gambler in the side, just above his hip. Blood spread across his vest, but he kept firing, his face expressionless. "Hatfield!" Ringo called out. "You hit! Keep shooting, boy." Doc had given up trying to aim and was simply firing in the general direction of the enemy, his eyes closed, tears streaming down his face. Whether from fear or whiskey or some combination of both, he fired until his gun was empty, then fumbled for more ammunition with hands that wouldn't obey. A rifle ball punched through the coach roof, showering them with splinters. Another took out one of the windows, sending glass flying. Peacock screamed as a shard cut his cheek, but the sound was lost in the general chaos. Buck's voice was hoarse now, raw from screaming encouragement to his team. The horses were running on pure terror, their eyes rolling white, foam flying from their mouths. One of the wheelers stumbled, nearly going down, but somehow recovered and kept running. On the rocks above, an Apache stood for just a moment too long, sighting down his rifle at Buck's exposed back. Curly saw him, swung the Winchester one-handed despite the arrow in his shoulder, and fired. The warrior spun and fell, tumbling down the rocks in a shower of loose stone. But the cost of that shot was high. Curly's wound was bleeding freely now, and his face had gone pale beneath the tan. He swayed in the seat, caught himself, kept firing. "Hold on!" Buck screamed. "Hold on! We're through! We're through!" And suddenly they were. The rocks fell away, replaced by open desert. Behind them, the Apaches held their ground rather than pursuing into terrain that offered no cover. The warriors watched from the heights as the coach pulled away, their rifles silent now, their arrow bows lowered. Inside the coach, no one spoke. They sat in stunned silence, surrounded by shattered glass and splintered wood and the copper smell of blood. Little Coyote's cries had faded to exhausted whimpers. Dallas slowly lifted herself from Lucy and the baby, checking them for wounds with hands that shook. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucy shook her head, unable to speak. The baby seemed unharmed, a miracle given the arrows that studded the coach's interior like deadly quills. Ringo was the first to notice Hatfield's condition. The gambler had slumped against the side of the coach, his rifle fallen from nerveless fingers. The arrow in his side had broken off, leaving just the shaft protruding, and blood pooled beneath him. "Hatfield," Ringo said, reaching for the wounded man. The gambler's eyes opened, focused on Lucy with effort. "Do you hear it?" From somewhere in the distance came the sound they'd all been praying for, the clear, bright notes of a cavalry bugle playing the charge. "Do you hear it? It's a bugle! They're blowing the charge!" The sound grew louder, and then they could hear the thunder of hooves as cavalry troops crested a rise and came galloping toward them. The blue uniforms were the most beautiful thing any of them had ever seen. Hatfield's hand groped for Lucy's, found it, held it with surprising strength. "If you see Judge Greenfield, tell him his son—" But whatever message he'd meant to send died with him. His eyes fixed on something none of the living could see, and his hand went slack in Lucy's. She stared down at the dead gambler, understanding flooding her face. "Greenfield," she whispered, "you were his son. You were trying to come home." The cavalry surrounded the coach, their captain calling out orders, his men forming a protective screen. Buck brought the team to a halt, the horses standing with heads down, sides heaving, too exhausted to take another step. "Everyone all right?" the captain called. Curly managed a nod, though he had to grip the seat to keep from falling. "Lost one. Hatfield." The captain's face was grim. "We saw the smoke signals, been riding hard to intercept. You're lucky you made it through." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Doc said, his voice thick. "Pure stubbornness and good horses." They buried Hatfield in the desert, wrapped in a cavalry blanket. Lucy stood by the grave with Little Coyote in her arms, her face composed despite the tears that streaked her cheeks. The man had been a gambler, possibly a killer, certainly a man who'd fallen far from whatever he'd been born to be. But in the end, he died protecting her, and that counted for something. The captain offered Lucy his own horse for the final leg into Lordsburg. Your husband is asking for you, ma'am. The wound isn't as bad as we first feared. He'll recover. Fresh hope lit Lucy's exhausted face. Truly? You're certain? Yes, ma'am. The doctor in Lordsburg is confident. With the cavalry escort, the final miles passed without incident. The coach rolled into Lordsburg in the early evening, the setting sun painting the dusty street gold and crimson. People emerged from buildings to stare at the arrow-studded coach, the blood-spattered passengers, the exhausted horses that Buck led with gentle words to the stable. A woman in a crisp nurse's uniform came forward. Mrs. Mallory, I'm to take you to your husband immediately. Lucy climbed down from the coach, moving like someone in a dream. She paused beside Dallas, and for a moment the two women looked at each other across the gulf that society had placed between them. Dallas, Lucy said softly, if there's ever anything I can do for— I know, Dallas interrupted, unable to bear the kindness in the other woman's voice. The nurse led Lucy away, and the crowd that had gathered began to disperse, their curiosity satisfied. Dallas stood alone beside the coach, her carpetbag at her feet, wondering what happened next. She didn't have long to wait. Curly emerged from the marshal's office with a pair of fresh handcuffs. Let's go, kid. Ringo nodded, extending his wrists. The metal clicked shut, familiar and cold. How long will they give me for breaking out? Oh, about another year. You know where my ranch is? Yeah. Ringo's eyes found Dallas in the crowd. Will you see that she gets there all right? This is no town for a girl like her. Will you do it? Curly followed the kid's gaze and sighed. Sure. Thanks. The local sheriff approached, a big man with hard eyes and a star that looked like it had been worn by several previous owners. How are you, Marshal? Get my man through all right? I don't need them, Curly said wearily. If you don't want to lose your prisoner, Sheriff, you'd better take care of him yourself. The sheriff gripped Ringo's arm. What's your name, mister? Before anyone could answer, a commotion erupted at the telegraph office. The operator came running out, waving a paper. Sheriff! Sheriff! Got a wire about that banker, Gatewood. Gatewood, who'd been trying to slip away into the crowd, froze. The color drained from his face as the operator continued. Says he embezzled $50,000 from his own bank. Warrant out for his arrest. The sheriff's face split in a grin. Well, well. Ellsworth H. Gatewood himself. You didn't think they'd have the telegraph wires fixed, did you? As the sheriff's deputy moved to take Gatewood into custody, the banker's face crumpled. All his plans, his careful timing, his desperate flight, all for nothing. The telegraph lines he'd thought cut had been repaired, and his crime had arrived in Lordsburg before he did. We got our banker! Someone in the crowd called, and laughter rippled through the assembled townspeople. Ringo watched this with distant interest, his mind already elsewhere. The sheriff was leading him toward the jail when Dallas pushed through the crowd. Can I meet you back here in 10 minutes? Ringo asked Curly. The marshal studied him for a long moment. I gave you my word, Curly. I ain't going back on it now. No ammunition, Curly said quietly, checking the kid's pockets. Ringo's slight smile was answer enough. I lied to you, Curly. Got 3 left. Curly sighed and handed the bullets back. Come on. They walked together through the darkening streets, the marshal and his prisoner, the woman who loved him trailing a few steps behind. The respectable people of Lordsburg drew back as Dallas passed, their faces registering the contempt she'd grown so used to it barely registered anymore. Good night, kid, Curly said when they reached a shabby boarding house on the edge of town. Is this where you live? Ringo asked Dallas. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. This was the moment she'd been dreading, when he would see what she was, understand the life she'd been living. No ranch would want her then. No decent man would want her. No, Dallas said, her voice breaking. Don't come any further. It's all been a crazy dream. I've been out of my mind just hoping. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. Say goodbye here, kid. We ain't never gonna say goodbye. From inside the building came the sound of breaking glass, followed by coarse laughter. It was a saloon as much as a boarding house, the kind of place where women like Dallas worked, if you could call it work. Ringo's face changed as understanding hit him. Not disgust as she'd expected, but something harder to bear, pity mixed with determination. Could I have that? He asked Curly,
gesturing to the shotgun the marshal carried. Curly handed it over without a word, then melted back into the shadows. This was between the kid and whatever demons he was about to face. Ringo pushed open the door to the saloon, and the noise inside died as men turned to see who'd entered. In the back, Luke Plummer looked up from his cards, his face registering shock, then savage pleasure. Luke, please don't," someone called. But Luke was already rising, his brothers Ike and Hank flanking him like matched bookends. From the street, Dallas watched through the window, her heart hammering. She wanted to run, to not see what was about to happen, but her feet wouldn't move. Inside, the saloon had gone silent. The piano player's hands stilled on the keys. The bartender ducked behind his bar. The other patrons pressed themselves against the walls, making space for what was coming. "Well, kid," Luke Plummer said, his hand hovering near his gun, "I told you not to follow me." Ringo's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Dallas, I asked you to marry me, didn't I?" Dallas couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but nod. "I'll never forget you asked me, kid. That's something. Wait here." The door squeaked as it closed behind him, and Dallas heard her own breathing loud in her ears. Wait here. As if she could do anything else. As if her whole life hadn't narrowed down to this moment, this man, this final desperate gamble at redemption. Inside the saloon, Luke Plummer's hand moved toward his gun. "I'll have you indicted for murder if you step outside with that shotgun." But it wasn't Curly who answered. It was the kid, his voice carrying a finality that made strong men shiver. "We'll attend to you later." "Don't ever let me do that again," someone muttered, but Ringo was already moving. The three Plummer brothers went for their guns simultaneously, a coordinated movement they'd practiced 100 times. They were fast, professional killers who'd sent more than one man to an early grave. But the kid was faster. The first shot rang out before Luke's pistol had fully cleared leather. The heavy boom of the shotgun filled the saloon, and Luke Plummer staggered backward, his chest blooming red. His gun clattered to the floor, unfired. Hank was faster than his brother, his weapon already rising, but Ringo had dropped the shotgun and drawn a pistol in one fluid motion. The report was sharp and clean, and Hank spun sideways, crashing into a table that collapsed under his weight. Ike fired wild, his shot punching a hole in the ceiling and sending down a shower of plaster. Ringo's return shot caught him square in the chest, driving him back against the bar. He slid down slowly, leaving a red smear on the polished wood. The silence that followed was absolute. Gun smoke hung in the air like fog, the acrid smell of it burning in everyone's nostrils. Through the haze, Ringo stood perfectly still, the pistol steady in his hand, his eyes moving from one fallen man to the next, making certain. Luke tried to speak, blood bubbling at his lips, but whatever words he'd meant to say died with him. His eyes went blank and fixed on nothing, and his body settled into the stillness that only death brings. Outside, Dallas had heard it all, the shots coming so close together they almost sounded like one long roll of thunder. Her hands were pressed to her mouth, her whole body trembling. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire, stretching out long enough that she began to think everyone inside must be dead. Then the door opened. Ringo stood framed in the lamplight, the pistol hanging loose in his hand. Blood stained his shirt where one of the Plummer brothers had gotten a shot off that had grazed his ribs, but he was walking, breathing, alive. "Ringo," Dallas breathed, and then she was running to him, not caring who saw, not caring what anyone thought. He caught her with his free arm, pulling her close, and for a moment they just stood there in the middle of the street while Lordsburg watched. A decent woman embracing an escaped convict who'd just killed 3 men. It was the kind of scandal that would fuel gossip for months. Curly emerged from the shadows where he'd been waiting, Doc Boone beside him. The marshal's face was unreadable as he surveyed the scene, taking in the blood on Ringo's shirt, the gun still in his hand, the way Dallas clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "Ready, kid?" Curly asked. Ringo gently disentangled himself from Dallas and handed the pistol to the marshal. "Thanks, Curly." The crowd that had gathered murmured among themselves, some voices raised in anger, others in something that might have been approval. Luke Plummer had been a bully and a killer, and there weren't many in Lordsburg who mourned his passing, but the law was the law, and killing was killing, no matter how justified.
The sheriff pushed through the crowd, his face red with fury. "That man murdered 3 citizens. I want him locked up until the circuit judge gets here." Curly's hand moved to his gun, a subtle shift that everyone noticed. He defended himself. 3 against 1. Any man here would have done the same. Self-defense? The sheriff's laugh was harsh. He walked in there looking for trouble. I got witnesses. You got witnesses who saw the plumbers draw first, Doc said quietly, emerging from the saloon. I was watching through the window. So was half the town. Kid gave them every chance to back down. The crowd's murmur changed tone, shifting from condemnation to something more complex. Several men nodded, confirming Doc's story. Others looked away, unwilling to contradict the town drunk, but also unwilling to speak against the sheriff. "Curly's going to see that you get to my place across the border," Ringo said to Dallas, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Please." Dallas wanted to protest, to say she'd wait for him, that she'd be there when he got out of prison, but the words stuck in her throat. They both knew the truth. If he went back to prison now, with an additional year for escape and possibly murder charges on top of that, he'd be an old man before he saw freedom again. "Maybe you'd like to ride a ways with the kid," Curly said, his eyes on Dallas. Her breath caught. "Please." The marshal turned to the sheriff with an expression of studied innocence. "Prisoner needs medical attention. That wound in his side could turn septic. I'm taking him to Doc's office to get patched up before we head back." The sheriff's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but he couldn't argue with the medical necessity. "You make sure he gets to that office and nowhere else, Marshal. I'll be watching." "Wouldn't dream of it," Curly said blandly. They walked through the darkened streets of Lordsburg, an odd procession, the marshal, the escaped convict, the woman with the ruined reputation, and the town drunk who'd somehow become the voice of moral authority. People watched from windows and doorways, their faces pale ovals in the lamplight, but no one interfered. Doc's office was above a feed store, reached by an outside staircase that creaked ominously under their weight. Inside, the single room was cluttered with medical texts, empty bottles, and the accumulated debris of a life that had long since lost its way. But Doc's hands were steady as he lit the lamps and gestured for Ringo to sit. "Let's have a look at that wound," he said, helping the kid remove his shirt. The bullet had carved a furrow across Ringo's ribs, deep enough to bleed freely, but not deep enough to do serious damage. Doc cleaned it with whiskey that made Ringo's jaw clench, then bandaged it with practiced efficiency. "You're lucky," Doc said. "Another inch to the left and we'd be planning your funeral instead of your escape." Ringo's head snapped up. "What?" Curly was at the window, peering down at the street below. "Sheriff's got men posted at both ends of the block, watching to make sure we don't pull anything funny." "So we don't," Doc said, moving to a cabinet and pulling out a bottle. "We just have ourselves a drink to celebrate the kid's recovery, take our time about it, and eventually the marshal escorts his prisoner back to jail." "Except the prisoner won't be there," Ringo said, understanding beginning to dawn. Curly turned from the window, and for the first time that night, he smiled. "Kid, I knew your daddy. He was a good man, and what happened to him and your brother wasn't justice. It was murder dressed up in legal clothes. The plumbers killed them sure as if they'd pulled the triggers themselves." "You're letting me go?" Ringo's voice was rough with disbelief. "I'm taking you back to jail," Curly said carefully. "But on the way, my prisoner might get away. These things happen. Man can't be expected to watch a wounded man and navigate dark streets at the same time." Doc poured whiskey into 4 glasses, his movement steady despite the magnitude of what they were planning. "There's a back way out, through the feed store. Opens onto an alley that runs behind the livery stable. You help yourself to a horse, there's a bay mare in the 3rd stall that's fast and sure-footed, and you ride like hell for the border." "Mexico's only 15 miles south," Curly added. "You can make it by dawn if you don't stop." Dallas had been silent through all of this, barely daring to breathe. Now she found her voice. "What about me?" The 3 men exchanged glances. It was Curly who spoke. "Ma'am, if you go with him now, you'll be a fugitive too. They'll hunt you both." "And if I don't go?" "Then you wait here. Give it a week, maybe 2, for things to cool down. Then you take the stage south, quiet-like, and you meet him at that ranch he told you about." Ringo reached for her hand. "Dallas, you can't." Don't tell me what I can't do. Her voice was fierce. I've spent my whole life being told what I can't do, where I can't go, who I can't be. I'm done with that. You'll be throwing away any chance of coming back, Doc said gently. Cross that border as a fugitive and you can never return. Not to this territory, maybe not to the States at all. Return to what? Dallas's laugh was bitter. To boarding houses that smell like stale beer and cheap perfume? To men who won't meet my eyes in daylight? To women who cross the street so they don't have to acknowledge my existence? She shook her head. There's nothing here worth coming back to. Ringo's hand tightened on hers. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Curly sighed but didn't argue further. He moved to the door, checking the street again. Sheriff's men are still there, but they're getting bored. Give it another half hour and they'll start thinking about supper instead of duty. They waited in tense silence, Doc periodically refreshing their glasses, the clock on the mantel ticking away the minutes. Outside, Lordsburg went about its evening business, saloons filling up, stores closing down, families gathering for their meals. Normal life, continuing as if nothing momentous was happening in the room above the feed store. Finally, Curly nodded. It's time. The watch is changing. I can see them talking down there. That's when they'll be least attentive. He turned to Ringo, his expression grave. You understand what this means? I'll have to report that you escaped. There'll be a warrant, a price on your head. You'll never be able to use your real name again. Henry died when his brother did, Ringo said quietly. I've been the kid for so long I barely remember being anyone else. And you? Curly looked at Dallas. You ready to leave everything behind? She thought of her trunk, still held hostage by the landlady in Tonto. Her few dresses, her mother's brooch, the small collection of things that proved she'd once been someone's daughter, someone's hope for the future. All of it suddenly seemed less important than the hand she held, the future that stretched out before her if she was brave enough to reach for it. I'm ready. Doc moved to embrace her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. You're a good girl, Dallas, better than this town deserves. You make yourself a life down there, you hear me? A real life. I will, Doc. I promise. She hugged him back, feeling his ribs sharp beneath his vest, smelling the whiskey on his breath and beneath it, the faint scent of the soap he must have used before delivering Little Coyote. Thank you. For everything. Curly shook Ringo's hand, the gesture formal and final. You take care of her, kid. And you stay on the right side of the border. I don't want to hear about you causing trouble. No, sir. Nothing but cattle ranching from here on out. See that it stays that way. The marshal's smile was sad. Now get going before I remember I'm supposed to be an officer of the law. Doc led them down a narrow interior staircase that connected to the feed store below. The smell of grain and hay was thick in the darkness, and somewhere a mouse skittered away from their footsteps. The back door opened onto an alley thick with shadows, the perfect cover for two people who needed to vanish. The bay mare, Doc reminded them in a whisper. Third stall. There's tack in the room beside it. Take what you need. The stable owner owes me for setting his daughter's broken arm. One more quick embrace, and then they were gone, slipping into the darkness like ghosts. Doc stood in the doorway watching until he couldn't see them anymore, then climbed back up to his office where Curly waited. Think they'll make it? The marshal asked. If love and stubbornness count for anything, they've got a better chance than most. Doc poured himself another drink, raising the glass in a silent toast to the darkness outside. Here's to new beginnings. In the alley, Ringo and Dallas moved quickly but carefully, conscious that every shadow could hide a deputy. Every sound could be someone raising an alarm. The livery stable loomed before them, its wide doors closed but not locked. Inside, horses shifted and snorted in their stalls, disturbed by the intrusion. Ringo counted stalls by feel, his hand trailing along the rough wood until he reached the third. The bay mare inside regarded him with liquid dark eyes, calm despite the late hour. Easy, girl, he murmured, opening the stall door. We're going to be friends, you and me. Dallas found the tack room and fumbled in the darkness for a saddle. Her hands encountered leather and metal, and she dragged the saddle out, staggering slightly under its weight. Ringo took it from her, settling it on the mare's back with practiced efficiency. Can you ride?
he asked, suddenly realizing he'd never thought to ask. I grew up on a farm in Missouri, she said. I could ride before I could walk. Then you take the mare. I'll find something else. But Dallas shook her head. We ride together. She's strong enough to carry us both for 15 miles. There was no time to argue. Ringo swung into the saddle and pulled Dallas up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the bandage beneath his shirt, the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. This was real. This was happening. They walked the mare out of the stable, still moving quietly, not wanting to attract attention. The street outside was empty, but lights showed in windows, and voices drifted from the saloons. Somewhere a dog barked, and Dallas's arms tightened reflexively. Hold on, Ringo whispered, and then he touched his heels to the mare's sides. The horse sprang forward, her hooves suddenly loud on the packed dirt of the street. Someone shouted behind them, and a door banged open. Ringo didn't look back, just leaned forward over the mare's neck and gave her her head. They thundered through Lordsburg at a full gallop, scattering chickens and making dogs bark in their wake. More shouts rose behind them, and Dallas heard the crack of a gunshot, but they were already past the last buildings, heading out into the open desert. The moon was rising, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. The mare ran easily, her stride long and smooth, eating up the miles. Dallas pressed her face against Ringo's back, breathing in the scent of him, sweat and gunpowder and the soap from the boarding house, all mixed together into something uniquely him. Behind them, Lordsburg receded into the distance, its lights growing smaller until they were just pinpricks against the darkness. Ahead, Mexico waited, and beyond that a future neither of them could quite imagine but both were willing to fight for. They rode for an hour before Ringo allowed the mare to slow to a walk. The horse was breathing hard but not labored, her sides heaving steadily. He patted her neck in appreciation. Good girl. You've earned your oats and then some. Dallas slid down from the mare's back, her legs shaky from the ride. The desert stretched out around them in all directions, empty and vast and somehow welcoming. No judgmental eyes here, no whispered condemnations, just the land and the sky and the promise of what might be. Are you all right? Ringo asked, dismounting beside her. I'm perfect. And she meant it. For the first time in longer than she could remember, everything felt exactly as it should. They stood together in the moonlight, this unlikely pair, the escaped convict and the woman with the ruined reputation, both of them outcasts, both of them free. Ringo's arm went around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of him, the certainty. The ranch is another 10 miles south and west, he said. We should reach it by mid-morning if we keep a steady pace. Tell me about it, Dallas said. Tell me everything. So as they walked, leading the mare to give her a rest, Ringo described the place that had sustained him through prison, through everything. The cabin his father had started building before the plumber's lies sent Ringo away. The creek that ran year-round, fed by springs in the hills. The pasture land that could support a good-sized herd. The cottonwoods that gave shade in summer. It's not much, he admitted. The cabin's only half finished. There's work to do, a lot of work. Building, fencing, getting stock together. It won't be easy. Dallas stopped walking and turned to face him. I don't need easy. I need honest. I need a chance to be something other than what people have decided I am. You're already everything you need to be, Ringo said, and the simple certainty in his voice made her eyes sting with tears. They walked on through the night, and as they went, Dallas felt the weight of her old life falling away like a shed skin. The contempt, the shame, the constant awareness of being judged and found wanting, all of it belonged to a different woman, one who'd died somewhere between Tonto and here. The new Dallas, the one being born with each step south, was someone different, someone who'd held a newborn and helped bring life into the world, someone who'd faced death in Apache country and hadn't broken. Someone brave enough to choose love over safety, hope over certainty. Dawn was breaking when they finally saw it, a rough cabin in a clearing surrounded by cottonwoods just as Ringo had described. The roof was only partially shingled, one wall stood open to the elements, but the bones of it were good, solid. A place that could be built into a home with time and effort and two pairs of hands working together. Ringo helped Dallas down from the mare, then stood looking at the cabin with an expression she couldn't quite read.
It's not what I promised you. It's exactly what you promised me, she corrected. Trees, grass, water, and a cabin half built. You didn't lie about a single thing. The creek burbled nearby, clear and cold, running over smooth stones. Birds were beginning their morning songs in the cottonwoods, and the air smelled of sage and possibility. Dallas walked to the cabin and stepped through the open wall, imagining how it would look when finished. A door there, windows catching the morning light, a stove in the corner, a table where they could share meals. We'll finish the roof first, Ringo said, coming to stand beside her. Then close in that wall before winter. I've got some money saved, enough to buy lumber and supplies from the town 15 miles south. And there's good grazing here. We can start with a small herd, build up slowly. Dallas turned to him, seeing not the escaped convict or the killer or the man marked by tragedy, but simply Ringo. Henry. Her future, if she was brave enough to claim it. Will you marry me? She asked. He blinked, startled. I already asked you that. I know, but I want to ask you. Will you marry me, Henry? Will you build this life with me, finish this cabin, raise cattle, grow old in this place? His smile started slow and built until it transformed his whole face. Yes, ma'am. I believe I will. They stood together in the half-finished cabin as the sun rose over the Mexican desert, painting everything gold and new. Somewhere behind them, the law was probably organizing a pursuit, warrants being written, rewards being posted. Somewhere ahead lay years of hard work, uncertainty, the constant awareness that they could never go back. But here, in this moment, with the morning light streaming through the gaps in the walls and the sound of the creek providing a gentle counterpoint to their breathing, none of that mattered. They had each other, they had this place, and they had the precious gift of a second chance. Dallas reached up and touched Ringo's face, feeling the rough stubble of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. I love you, she said, speaking the words for the first time in her life and meaning them with every fiber of her being. I love you too, he replied, and then he was kissing her, gentle and fierce and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ringo gestured to the mare, who was drinking from the creek with evident satisfaction. I should take care of the horse. She's earned it. I'll start a fire, Dallas said. See if there's anything to cook. We'll need to eat before we start work. It was such a simple domestic exchange, the kind that married couples had every day without thinking. But for them, it was revolutionary. The first conversation of their new life, the beginning of everything. As Ringo led the mare to an improvised corral and Dallas explored the cabin's meager supplies, the sun continued its climb into a cloudless sky. And far to the north, in Lordsburg, Curly was explaining to a furious sheriff how his prisoner had somehow managed to overpower him in the darkness, how he'd searched for hours but lost the trail, how these things happened sometimes despite a lawman's best efforts. Doc Boone listened to the explanation from his office window and smiled into his whiskey. Then he raised his glass in another silent toast, this one to the two people who'd somehow managed to save each other when saving themselves had seemed impossible. Well, they're saved from the blessings of civilization, he said to no one in particular. And in that moment, drunk as he was, Doc Boone spoke a truth more profound than any he'd uttered in years. Because sometimes salvation didn't look like what people expected. Sometimes it looked like an escaped convict and a woman with a ruined reputation riding toward the border with nothing but hope and each other. Sometimes the only way to be saved was to run. The first week passed in a blur of exhausting labor. Ringo worked from dawn until his hands bled, determined to make the cabin weatherproof before the season turned. Dallas discovered muscles she didn't know she had, hauling water from the creek, gathering wood, learning to cook over an open fire with whatever provisions they could scrape together. They spoke little during those early days, both of them too tired for much conversation once darkness fell. But they learned each other in different ways, the rhythm of working side by side, the comfort of shared silence, the small gestures that became a language all their own. On the 8th morning, Dallas woke to find Ringo already gone from their makeshift bed of blankets. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find him standing at the edge of the clearing, staring north with an expression that made her stomach clench. "What is it?" she asked, moving to his side. He pointed to a dust cloud on the horizon, still distant but unmistakable.
Riders, could be anyone, but probably not, Dallas finished. Her first instinct was to run, to hide, but she forced herself to stand still. Running was what the old Dallas would have done. The new Dallas faced things head on. They waited together as the riders approached, and Dallas felt Ringo's hand find hers. Whatever came, they would meet it together. The dust cloud resolved into 3 horses, and Dallas's breath caught when she recognized the lead rider. Curly sat tall in the saddle, his badge catching the morning sun. Beside him rode a younger man she didn't know, and behind them both came Buck, leading a pack horse laden with supplies. Ringo's hand moved to the pistol at his belt, but Curly raised his hands, showing they were empty. "We're not here to arrest anyone, kid," the marshal called out when he was close enough to be heard. "Just came to talk." "Talk about what?" Ringo's voice was wary, but he didn't draw. Curly dismounted with a grunt, his shoulder still bandaged from the Apache arrow. "Mind if we sit a spell? Long ride from Lordsburg, and I'm not as young as I used to be." Dallas found herself moving automatically into the role of hostess, gesturing to the rough log benches Ringo had fashioned. "I can make coffee. It won't be good, but it'll be hot." "Ma'am, I'd drink mud if it was offered friendly," Buck said with his gap-toothed grin. "And I gotta say, this here's a nice spot you got. Real nice." The young man with them hadn't spoken yet. He dismounted and stood awkwardly to one side, his eyes taking in everything with the intensity of someone who'd been told to remember details. "This is Deputy Marshal Tom Harrison," Curly said, noting Ringo's attention on the stranger. "He's here official-like, as a witness. What we have to say needs to be said legal and proper." Dallas's hands trembled as she measured coffee into the pot, but she forced them steady. Whatever was coming, she wouldn't show fear. She'd shown enough fear in her life. When the coffee was ready and everyone had a tin cup in hand, Curly cleared his throat. "The sheriff in Lordsburg, he wanted to form up a posse and come after you both. Said it was his duty, said the law was the law." Ringo's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. "Thing is," Curly continued, "before he could get that posse together, some interesting things happened. First, the territorial governor got himself a telegram. Seems someone sent him a detailed account of the Plummer trial, how the testimony was bought and paid for, how Luke and his brothers forced witnesses to lie. Even had signed affidavits from 2 men willing to admit they perjured themselves." "Who sent that?" Ringo asked. "Never did figure that out," Curly said blandly, though his eyes met Doc Boone's and Dallas's imagination. "Might have been anyone who knew the truth and had a conscience." Buck leaned forward eagerly. "Then the judge that presided over your trial, he up and confessed that the Plumbers threatened his family if he didn't sentence you, said he'd been living with the guilt ever since and couldn't do it no more." Deputy Harrison spoke for the first time, his voice formal and careful. "The territorial governor has issued a full pardon for Henry McCarty, also known as the Ringo Kid, for all crimes related to the murder of John Plummer's foreman. Said pardon is retroactive and unconditional." The words hung in the air, too big to comprehend immediately. Dallas felt the coffee cup slip from her nerveless fingers, heard it clatter against the ground, but couldn't seem to make her body respond. "Pardon?" Ringo's voice was barely a whisper. Curly reached into his vest and pulled out an official-looking document, the territorial seal heavy and red at the bottom. "Full and complete. As far as the law is concerned, you're a free man. Never should have been in prison in the first place." "But I broke out," Ringo protested, as if trying to talk himself back into being a criminal. "And I killed the Plumbers." "You escaped from illegal imprisonment," Deputy Harrison corrected, reading from notes. "And you acted in self-defense against 3 men who drew on you first. Multiple witnesses confirm this, including Dr. Josiah Boone and Marshal Curly Wilcox himself." "I was watching through that window," Curly said quietly. "Saw the whole thing. You gave them every chance to walk away, kid. They chose to draw." Dallas found her voice at last. "So he can come back?" "We can go back." Buck's expression turned uncomfortable. "Well now, that's the complicated part. See, you can come back, kid. You're pardoned and free and welcome. But Miss Dallas here—" He trailed off, and it was Curly who finished the thought. "Lordsburg ain't changed its mind about women like you, ma'am. The Law and Order League is still going strong, still running off anyone they think ain't respectable.
You'd have a roof over your head and food to eat on account of being the kid's wife, but you wouldn't have peace. Not the kind you deserve, anyway. Dallas felt something inside her settle, like a weight finding its proper place. Then we stay here. Ringo turned to her, his face urgent. Dallas, you don't have to. I'm free now. I can go back, find decent work, build us a proper life somewhere respectable. This is respectable, she said firmly. This place, this life we're building with our own hands. I don't need Lordsburg's approval or Tonto's forgiveness. I need this. She gestured to the half-finished cabin, the creek, the vast sky overhead. I need you, and I need to know that what we have is ours because we chose it, not because some judge or governor said we could have it. Buck was grinning again, his whole face creased with delight. You got yourself a stubborn one there, kid. My Julieta's the same way. It's the best kind of woman, the kind that knows her own mind. Curly stood, joints creaking. There's one more thing. The territorial governor, he was so embarrassed about the whole mess with your trial that he offered compensation. Said the territory owed you for time wrongfully served. He gestured to the pack horse. That there's got lumber, nails, glass for windows, and $300 in gold. Figure it's the least they could do. Ringo stood slowly, his expression dazed. I don't know what to say. Don't say nothing, Buck advised. Just build yourself a good life and forget about folks like the plumbers. They're gone, and good riddance. Deputy Harrison stepped forward with another document. If you'll just sign here, acknowledging receipt of the pardon and the compensation, I can file this back in the Capitol, and the matter's settled. Ringo's hand shook slightly as he signed his name. Not Ringo Kid, but Henry McCarty, the name his mother had given him, the name he'd almost forgotten. Dallas watched him write it and felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. Henry. Her Henry. The three men prepared to leave, and Dallas hurried to pack them some of the bread she'd baked that morning, meager as it was. Thank you, she said to Curly, for everything, for believing in him when no one else would. The marshal's weathered face softened. I believed in both of you, ma'am. Takes a special kind of courage to leave everything behind and start fresh. You've got that courage in spades. Buck clasped Ringo's hand, pumping it enthusiastically. You ever need anything, you send word to Buck Rickabaugh in Lordsburg. I'll bring it myself. Don't care how far I gotta drive. How's Mrs. Mallory? Dallas asked, the question emerging before she could stop it. And the baby? Buck's face lit up. Little Coyote's doing just fine, growing like a weed. And Mrs. Mallory, well, her husband's recovered complete. They're heading back to Virginia next month, going to introduce little Coyote to her grandparents. He paused, then added carefully, Mrs. Mallory asked after you, wanted me to tell you that if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you just have to ask. Dallas's eyes stung with unexpected tears. To be remembered with kindness by someone like Lucy Mallory, someone who'd had every reason to despise her but had chosen grace instead, it was a gift she hadn't known she needed. The riders departed in a cloud of dust, heading back north toward a world that Dallas and Ringo no longer quite belonged to. They stood together watching until the dust settled and the desert was empty again. We could still go back, Ringo said quietly. I'm pardoned. We could have a normal life. This is normal, Dallas replied. Our normal. And it's enough. That afternoon, they unloaded the pack horse together, marveling at the supplies like children at Christmas. Real glass for windows, enough lumber to finish the roof and walls, tools that would make the work so much easier. And the gold. $300 was more money than either of them had ever possessed at once. We could buy cattle, Ringo said, turning a gold coin over in his fingers. Start a real herd, not just the few head I was planning to scrape together. We could buy furniture, Dallas countered. A real bed, a stove, maybe even a rocking chair for the porch. They looked at each other and laughed, the sound bright and free in the desert air. They could buy anything, do anything, be anything. The future spread out before them like the land itself, vast, uncharted, full of possibility. The weeks that followed were harder than anything Dallas had ever done, but also more satisfying. Together, she and Ringo finished closing in the cabin's walls, working side by side to fit each board into place. They glazed the windows with the precious glass, and the first night they could close the door against the desert chill, felt like moving into a palace. Ringo proved to be a patient teacher, showing Dallas how to handle cattle, how to read the weather, how to survive in this harsh land that could kill the unprepared. And Dallas taught him things too, how to make a house into a home, how to laugh at setbacks instead of letting them crush you, how to believe that good things could last. 2 months after Curly's visit, a priest wandered into their clearing. He was an itinerant minister who traveled a circuit through the scattered settlements on both sides of the border, bringing baptisms and marriages and last rites to those who wanted them. "I heard there was a couple out this way, looking to make things official," he said, his accent thick with Spanish vowels. Dallas and Ringo exchanged glances. They'd been living as man and wife, but without any ceremony beyond their own promises. "Who told you that?" Ringo asked. The priest smiled. "A marshal named Curly sent word to my church. Said there was 2 good people down here who deserved to start their life right and proper." So they were married in front of the half-finished cabin, with no witnesses except the bay mare and a hawk circling overhead. The priest's words were simple and direct, asking if they would honor each other, stay faithful, build a life together. When it came time to exchange vows, Dallas found herself speaking from the heart. "I promise to stand beside you in good times and bad," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "To work when work is needed, to rest when rest is earned, and to love you every day we have together." Ringo's vows were equally simple. "I promise to give you the life you deserve, not the one society says you should have, but the one you choose for yourself. I promise to see you as you are, not as anyone else wants you to be. And I promise to love you until my last breath and beyond." The priest pronounced them man and wife, and when Ringo kissed her, Dallas felt the last pieces of her old life finally fall away. She was no longer the girl from Missouri, no longer the woman driven out of Tonto, no longer Dallas at all in the way she'd been. She was simply herself, whole, complete, beloved. That winter was hard. The desert could be brutally cold when the sun went down, and there were nights when they huddled together for warmth, burning through wood faster than they could cut it. But they survived, and when spring came, it brought changes neither of them had anticipated. Dallas woke one morning with a strange flutter in her stomach, a sensation she recognized from helping with animals on her childhood farm. She said nothing to Ringo for several weeks, wanting to be certain, but when she finally told him, his face transformed with wonder. "A baby?" His hand moved to her still flat stomach with reverence. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." And she was. The sickness in the mornings, the exhaustion, the way her body felt different, all of it pointed to new life growing inside her. Ringo's joy was tempered with worry. "We need a doctor, someone who knows what they're doing. What if something goes wrong?" "Then we'll handle it," Dallas said with more confidence than she felt. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. We'll manage." But Ringo wouldn't be dissuaded. The next day, he rode to the nearest town and returned with a midwife, a weathered Mexican woman named Senora Ortiz, who took one look at Dallas and nodded approvingly. "You're strong," she said in heavily accented English. "You do good, but I come back when time is close. Make sure everything's safe." True to her word, Senora Ortiz appeared again 7 months later, her burro laden with supplies. She moved into the cabin's finished second room, the one they'd built specifically for the baby, and waited with the patience of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. The labor began on a night when the stars seemed close enough to touch. Dallas had helped Lucy Mallory through this, had seen what it took, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it herself. The pain was immense, overwhelming, but through it all she could hear Ringo's voice, steady and sure, telling her she could do this. She was strong enough, just a little more. When their daughter finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and utterly perfect, Dallas understood for the first time what it meant to love someone more than yourself. She cradled the infant to her chest, feeling the rapid beat of that tiny heart, and knew she would do anything, endure anything, to keep this child safe. "What should we name her?" Ringo asked, his voice thick with emotion. Dallas thought of the journey that had brought them here, of all the people who'd helped along the way. "Hope," she said finally. "Her name is Hope." Senora Ortiz stayed for 2 weeks, making sure both mother and baby were thriving. When she finally prepared to leave, Dallas pressed half their remaining gold into her hands. No, no, the midwife protested. It's too much. It's not enough, Dallas insisted. You gave me my daughter safe and healthy. That's worth everything we have. The midwife's eyes filled with tears. You good woman, good mother. Don't let anyone tell you different. After she left, Dallas and Ringo settled into the rhythms of new parenthood. The nights were sleepless, the days exhausting, but there was a joy in it that Dallas had never imagined possible. Watching Ringo hold his daughter, seeing the tenderness in his rough hands, the wonder in his face, it healed something in Dallas she hadn't known was broken. The years that followed brought both hardships and blessings. The ranch grew slowly but steadily, their herd expanding until they had enough cattle to support them comfortably. They built an addition onto the cabin, then another, until it was a proper house with 4 rooms and a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set. Hope grew into a wild, fearless child who could ride before she could read and could rope a calf before she could write her name. She had Dallas's green eyes and Ringo's easy smile, and she was loved with an intensity that sometimes frightened Dallas with its depth. When Hope was 3, Curly appeared again, this time with news from Lordsburg. "Thought you'd want to know," he said over coffee on that porch. "The Law and Order League disbanded. Too many of the women moved away, and the ones who stayed got tired of telling other people how to live." "So Lordsburg's changed?" Dallas asked, not sure how she felt about that. "Some," Curly admitted. "Not enough that I'd recommend moving back, mind you, but enough that if you wanted to visit, you wouldn't be run out of town." Dallas glanced at Ringo, who shrugged. "We've got everything we need right here." "That you do," Curly agreed, watching Hope chase chickens in the yard. "That you surely do." He brought news of others, too. Doc Boone had finally sobered up, inspired by a near-death experience and the memory of delivering Little Coyote. He was practicing medicine again, and folks said he was almost as good as he'd been before the war. Buck and Julietta had added another child to their sprawling family, bringing the total to 7. And Lucy Mallory had written from Virginia, asking that her regards be passed along to Dallas if Curly ever saw her. "She said to tell you that Little Coyote asks about the kind lady who held her when she was born," Curly relayed. "Said her daughter's first memory, or at least the story they tell her, is of being safe in your arms." Dallas had to turn away to hide her tears. To be remembered as kind, as someone who'd mattered in a good way, it was more than she'd ever dared hope for. When Hope was 5, another rider appeared at their ranch. This one was a young man, barely 20, with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. He'd heard, he said, that this was a place where people who'd been judged and found wanting could make a fresh start. Dallas and Ringo looked at each other, a whole conversation passing in that glance. They took the young man in, gave him work, asked no questions about his past. Within a year, he'd built his own cabin a mile down the creek, started his own small herd with a few head they'd given him as payment. Others followed over the years. A woman fleeing an abusive husband, a former soldier who couldn't adjust to peacetime, a freed slave looking for land where his color wouldn't define his worth. One by one, they came, and one by one, Dallas and Ringo helped them find their footing. Their ranch became a community, a settlement of misfits and outcasts who'd found in each other what society had denied them: acceptance, purpose, belonging. They built a schoolhouse and hired a teacher. They started holding dances in the barn once a month. They created something that looked like civilization but felt like family. On Hope's 10th birthday, they held a celebration that brought together everyone from miles around. There was food and music and laughter, and as Dallas stood on the porch watching her daughter dance with the neighbor children, she felt Ringo's arms slip around her waist. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Dallas thought about the girl she'd been in Tonto, driven out by righteous women who'd never bothered to learn her story. She thought about the desperate days in Lordsburg, believing she'd never deserve anything better. She thought about the fear and the shame and the years of believing she was somehow less than other people. Then she looked at what she had now, a home built with her own hands, a husband who loved her without reservation, a daughter who knew nothing of shame or judgment, a community of people who'd all been broken and had healed together. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Years later, when Hope was grown and married with children of her own, when Dallas's hair had gone gray and Ringo's hands were gnarled with arthritis, they would still sit on that porch in the evenings. They'd watch the sun set over land they'd tamed and healed, surrounded by a settlement that had grown into a proper town, and they'd remember. They'd remember the stagecoach rattling through Apache territory with death on every side. They'd remember Little Coyote's first cry and Hatfield's last words. They'd remember Curly's kindness and Doc's redemption. They'd remember the moment they'd chosen each other over safety, hope over certainty, love over law. And they'd remember that sometimes the best life wasn't the one you were supposed to have, but the one you were brave enough to claim. Dallas would take Ringo's weathered hand in hers, feeling the calluses and scars that matched her own. And she'd think about how far they'd come, from outcasts to founders, from fugitives to family, from desperation to something that looked remarkably like happiness. "Tell me again," Hope's children would beg when they visited. "Tell us about the stagecoach and the Apaches and how you and Grandpa fell in love." And Dallas would tell them, leaving out the parts too harsh for young ears but keeping the essential truth. That love could find you in the strangest places. That redemption was possible even when you'd been told you didn't deserve it. That the life you built with your own hands was worth more than any life handed to you by people who didn't know your worth. The settlement they'd founded grew into a thriving town, one where everyone was welcome regardless of their past. They named it Esperanza, Spanish for hope, and it became known throughout the territory as a place where second chances were the rule rather than the exception. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the desert wind sang through the cottonwoods, Dallas and Ringo would sit together and watch the stars emerge. They'd survived things that should have killed them, beaten odds that should have been impossible, and built something beautiful from the ruins of their old lives. They were home. They were free. And they were, finally and forever, exactly where they were meant to be.